Chapter 27 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 27. A Girl Who Laughed. It was towards nightfall of the day on which Dickory had escaped from the pirates at the spring that he found himself on a piece of high ground in an open place in the forest, and here he determined to spend the night. With his dirk he cut a quantity of palmetto leaves and made himself a very comfortable bed, on which he was soon asleep, fearing no pirates. In the morning he rose early from his green couch, ate the few biscuits which were left in his pockets, and, putting on his shoes and stockings, started forth upon which may have been supposed to be an aimless tramp. But it was not aimless. Dickory had a most wholesome dread of that indomitable apostle of cruelty and wickedness, the pirate Blackbeard. He believed that it would be quite possible for that savage being to tie up his beard in tails, to blacken his face with powder, to hang more pistols from his belt and around his neck, and swear that the Revenge should never leave her anchorage until her first lieutenant had been captured and brought back to her. So he had an aim, and that was to get away as far as possible from the spot where he had landed on the island. He did not believe that his pursuers, if there were any upon his track, could have travelled in the night, for it had been pitchy black, and, as he now had a good start of them, he thought he might go so far that they would give up the search. Then he hoped to be able to keep himself alive until he was reasonably sure that the Revenge had hoisted anchor and sailed away, when it was his purpose to make his way back to the spring and wait for some other vessel, which would take him away. With his shoes on he travelled more easily, although not so swiftly, and after an hour of very rough walking he heard a sound which made him stop instantly and listen. At first he thought it might be the wind in the trees, but soon his practised ear told him that it was the sound of the surf upon the beach. Without the slightest hesitation he made his way as quickly as possible towards the sound of the sea. In less than half an hour he found himself upon a stretch of sand which extended from the forest to the sea, and upon which the waves were throwing themselves in long crested lines. With a cry of joy he ran out upon the beach, and with outstretched arms he welcomed the sea as if it had been an old and well-tried friend. But Dickory's gratitude and joy had nothing to found itself upon. The sea might far better have been his enemy than his friend, for if he had thought about it, the sandy beach would have been the road by which a portion of the pirates' men would have marched to cut off his flight, or they would have accomplished the same end in boats. But Dickory thought of no enemy, and his heart was cheered. He pressed on along the beach. The walking was so much better now that he made good progress, and the sun had not reached its zenith when he found himself on the shore of a small stream which came down from some higher land in the interior and here poured itself into the sea. He walked some distance by this stream, in order to get some water which might be free from brackishness, and then, with very little trouble, he crossed it. Before him was a knoll of moderate height, and covered with low foliage. Mounting this, he found that he had an extended view over the interior of the island. In the background there stretched a wide savanna, and at the distance of about half a mile he saw, very near a little cluster of trees, a thin column of smoke. His eyes rounded, and he stared and stared. He now perceived, from behind the leaves, the end of a thatched roof. "People!" Dickory exclaimed, and his heart beat fast with joy. Why his heart should be joyful he could not have told himself, except that there was no earthly reason to believe that the persons who were making that fire near that thatched roof house were pirates. To go to this house, whatever it might be, to take his chances there instead of remaining alone in the wide forest, was a young man's instant determination. But before he started there was something else he thought of. He took off his coat, and with a bunch of leaves he brushed it. Then he arranged the plumes of his hat and brushed some mud from them, gave himself a general shake, and was ready to make a start. All this by a fugitive pursued by savage pirates on a desert island. But Dickory was a young man, and he wore the uniform of a naval officer. After a brisk walk, which was somewhat longer than he had supposed it would be, Dickory reached the house behind the trees. At a short distance burned the fire whose smoke he had seen. Over the fire hung an iron pot. Oh, blessed pot! A gentle breeze blew from the fire towards Dickory, and from the heavenly odour which was borne upon it he knew that something good to eat was cooking in that pot. A man came quickly from behind the house. He was tall, with a beard a little grey, and his scanty attire was of the most nondescript fashion. With amazement upon his face, he spoke to Dickory in English. "What, sir," he cried, "has a man-of-war touched at this island?" Dickory could not help smiling, for the man's countenance told him how he had been utterly astounded, and even stupefied, by the sight of a gentleman in naval uniform in the interior of that island, an almost desert region. "No man-of-war has touched here," said Dickory, "and I don't belong to one. I wear these clothes because I am compelled to do so, having no others. Yesterday afternoon I escaped from some pirates who stopped for water, and since leaving them I have made my way to this spot." The man stepped forth quickly and stretched out his hand. "Bless you! Bless you!" he cried. "You are the first human being, other than my family, that I have seen for 2 years." A little girl now came from behind the house, and when her eyes fell upon Dickory and his cocked hat, she screamed with terror and ran indoors. A woman appeared at the door, evidently the man's wife. She had a pleasant face, but her clothes riveted Dickory's attention. It would be impossible to describe them even if one were gazing upon them. It will be enough to say that they covered her. Her amazement more than equalled that of her husband. She stood and stared, but could not speak. "From the spring at the end of the island," cried the man, "to this house since yesterday afternoon. I have always supposed that no one could get here from the spring by land. I call that way impassable. You are safe here, sir, I am sure. Pirates would not follow very far through the forests and morasses. They would be afraid they would never get back to their ship. But I will find out for certain if you have reason, sir, to fear pursuit by boat or otherwise." And then, stepping around to the other end of the house, he called, "Lucilla!" "You are hungry, sir," said the woman. "Presently you shall share our meal, which is almost cooked." Now the man returned. "This is not a time for questions, sir," he said, "either from you or from us. You must eat and you must rest, then we can talk. We shall not any of us apologize for our appearance, and you will not expect it when you have heard our story. But I can assure you, sir, that we do not look nearly so strange to you as you appear to us. Never before, sir, did I see in this climate and on shore a man attired in such fashion. Dickory smiled. "I will tell you the tale of it," he said, "when we have eaten. I admit that I am famished." The man was now called away, and when he returned he said to Dickory: "Fear nothing, sir. Your ship is no longer at the anchorage by the spring. She has sailed away, wisely concluding, I suppose, that pursuit of you would be folly and even madness." The dinner was an exceedingly plain one, spread upon a rude table under a tree. The little girl, who had overcome her fear of the soldier, as she considered him, made one of the party. During the meal Dickory briefly told his story, confining it to a mere statement of his escape from the pirates. "Blackbeard!" exclaimed the man, "truly you did well to get away from him. No matter into what forest you plunged or upon what desert island you lost yourself. At any moment he might have turned upon you and cut you to pieces to amuse himself. I have heard the most horrible stories of Blackbeard." "He treated me very well," said Dickory, "but I know from his own words that he reserved me for a most horrible fate." "What?" exclaimed the man, "and he told you? He is indeed a demon." "Yes," said Dickory. "He said over and over again that he was going to take me to England to marry me to his daughter." At this the wife could not refrain from a smile. "Matrimony is not generally considered a horrible fate," she said. "Perhaps his daughter may be a most comely and estimable young person. Girls do not always resemble their fathers." "Do not mention it," exclaimed Dickory, with a shudder. "That was one reason that I ran away. I preferred any danger from a man or beast to that he was taking me to." "He is engaged to be married," thought the woman. "It is easy enough to see that." "Now tell me your story, I pray you," said Dickory. "But first, I would like very much to know how you found out that Blackbeard's ship was not at her anchorage." "That's a simple thing," said the man. "Of course you did not observe, for you could not, that from its eastern point where lies the spring, this island stretches in a long curve to the south, reaching northward again about this spot. Consequently, there is a little bay to the east of us, across which we can see the anchoring ground of such ships as may stop here for water. Your way around the land curve of the island was a long one, but the distance straight across the bay is but a few miles. Upon a hill not far from here there is a very tall tree, which overtops all the other trees, and to the upper branches of this tree my daughter, who is a great climber, frequently ascends with a small glass, and is thus able to report if there is a vessel at the anchorage." "What?" exclaimed Dickory. "That little girl?" "Oh, no," said the man. "It is my other daughter, who is a grown young woman." "She is not here now," said the mother, and this piece of unnecessary information was given in tones which might indicate that the young lady had stepped around to visit a neighbour. "It is important," said the man, "that I should know if vessels have anchored here, for if they be merchantmen I sometimes do business with them." "Business," said Dickory. "That sounds extremely odd. Pray tell me how you came to be here." "My name is Mander," said the other, "and about 2 years ago I was on my way from England to Barbados, where, with my wife and 2 girls, I expected to settle. We were captured by a pirate ship and marooned upon this island. I will say, to the pirate captain's credit, that he was a good sort of man considering his profession. He sailed across the bay on purpose to find a suitable place to land us, and he left with us some necessary articles, such as axes and tools, kitchen utensils, and a gun with some ammunition. Then he sailed away, leaving us here, and here we have since lived. Under the circumstances, we have no right to complain, for had we been taken by an ordinary pirate, it is likely that our bones would now be lying at the bottom of the sea. Here I have worked hard and have made myself a home, such as it is. There are wild cattle upon the distant savannas, and I trap game and birds, cultivate the soil to a certain extent, and if we had clothes I might say we would be in better circumstances than many a respectable family in England. Sometimes when a merchantman anchors here, and I have hides or anything else which we can barter for things we need, I row over the bay in a canoe which I have made, and have thus very much bettered our condition. But in no case have I been able to provide my family with suitable clothes." "Why did you not get some of the merchant ships to carry you away?" asked Dickory. The man shook his head. "There is no place," he said sadly, "to which I can in reason ask a ship to carry me and my family. We have no money, no property whatever. In any other place I would be far poorer than I am here. My children are not uneducated. My wife and I have done our best for them in that respect, and we have some books with us. So, as you see, it would be rash in me to leave a home which, rude as it is, shelters and supports my family, to go as paupers and strangers to some other land." The wife heaved a sigh. "But poor Lucilla," she said. "It is dreadful that she should be forced to grow up here." "Lucilla?" asked Dickory. "Yes, sir," she said, "my eldest daughter, but she is not here now." Dickory thought that it was somewhat odd that he should be again informed of a fact which he knew very well, but he made no remarks upon the subject. Still wearing his cocked hat, for he had nothing else with which to shield his head from the sun, and with his uniform coat on, for he had not yet an opportunity of ripping from it the letter he carried, and this he would not part from, Dickory roamed about the little settlement. Mander was an industrious and thrifty man. His garden, his buildings, and his surroundings showed that. Walking past a clump of low bushes, Dickory was startled by a laugh, a hearty laugh, the laugh of a girl. Looking quickly around, he saw, peering above the top of the bushes, the face of the girl who had laughed. "It is too funny," she said, as his eyes fell upon her. "I never saw anything so funny in all my life. A man in regimentals in this weather and upon a desert island. You look as if you had marched faster than your army, and that you had lost it in the forest." Dickory smiled. "You ought not to laugh at me," he said, "for these clothes are really a great misfortune. If I could change them for something cool, I should be more than delighted." "You might take off your heavy coat," said she. "You need not be on parade here, and instead of that awful hat, I can make you one of long grass. Do you see the one I have on? Isn't that a good hat? I have one nearly finished, which I am making for my father. You may have that." Dickory would most gladly have taken off his coat if, without observation, he could have transferred his sacred letter to some other part of his clothes, but he must wait for that. He accepted instantly, however, the offer of the hat. "You seem to know all about me," he said. "Did you hear me tell my story?" "Every word of it," said she, "and it is the queerest story I ever heard. Think of a pirate carrying a man away to marry him to his daughter. But why don't you come from behind that bush and talk to me?" "I can't do it," said she. "I am dressed funnier than you are. Now I am going to make your hat." And in an instant she had departed. Dickory now strolled on, and when he returned he seated himself in the shade near the house. The letter of Captain Vince was taken from his coat lining and secured in one of his breeches pockets. His heavy coat and waistcoat lay upon the ground beside him, and the cocked hat placed upon them. As he leaned back against the tree and inhaled the fragrant breeze which came to him from the forest, Dickory was a more cheerful young man than he had been for many, many days. He thought of this himself, and wondered how a man, carrying with him his sentence of lifelong misery, could lean against a tree and take pleasure in anything, be it a hospitable welcome, a sense of freedom from danger, a fragrant breeze, or the face of a pretty girl behind a bush. But these things did please him. He could not help it. And when presently came Mrs. Mander, bringing him a light grass hat fresh from the manufacturer's hands, he took it and put it on with more evident pleasure than the occasion seemed to demand. "Your daughter is truly an artist," said Dickory. "She does many things well," said the mother, "because necessity compels her and all of us to learn to work in various ways." "Can I not thank her?" said Dickory. "No," the mother answered, "she is not here now." Dickory had begun to hate that self-evident statement. "She's looking out for ships. Her pride is a little touched that she missed Blackbeard's vessel yesterday." "Perhaps," said Dickory, with a movement as if he would like to make a step in the direction of some tall tree upon a hill. "No," said Mrs. Mander, "I cannot ask you to join my daughter. I am compelled to state that her dress is not a suitable one in which to appear before a stranger." "Excuse me," said Dickory, "and I beg, madam, that you will convey to her my thanks for making me such an excellent hat." A little later Mander joined Dickory. "I am sorry, sir," said he, "that I am not able to present you to my daughter Lucilla. It is a great grief to us that her attire compels her to deny herself other company than that of her family. I really believe, sir, that it is Lucilla's deprivations on this island which form at present my principal discontent with my situation. But we all enjoy good health, we have enough to eat, and shelter over us, and should not complain." As soon as he was at liberty to do so, Dickory walked by the hedge of low bushes, and there, above it, was the bright face with the pretty grass hat. "I was waiting for you," said she. "I wanted to see how that hat fitted, and I think it does nicely. And I wanted to tell you that I have been looking out for ships, but have not seen one. I don't mean by that I want you to go away almost as soon as you have come, but of course if a merchant ship should anchor here, it would be dreadful for you not to know." "I am not sure," said Dickory gallantly, "that I am in a hurry for a ship. It is truly very pleasant here." "What makes it pleasant?" said the girl. Dickory hesitated for a moment. "The breeze from the forest," said he. She laughed. "It is charming," she said, "but there are so many places where there is just as good a breeze, or perhaps better. How I would like to go to some one of them. To me this island is lonely and doleful. Every time I look over the sea for a ship, I hope that one will come that can carry us away." "Then," said Dickory, "I wish a ship would come tomorrow and take us all away together." She shook her head. "As my father told you," said she, "we have no place to go to." Dickory thought a good deal about the sad condition of the family of this worthy marooner. He thought of it even after he had stretched himself for the night upon the bed of palmetto leaves beneath the tree against which he had leaned when he wondered how he could be so cheerful under the shadow of the sad fate which was before him. End of chapter 27. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 28 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 28. Lucilla's Ship. As soon as Dickory had left off his cocked hat and his gold-embroidered coat, the little girl Lena had ceased to be afraid of him, and the next morning she came to him, seated lonely, for this was a busy household, and asked him if he would like to take a walk. So, hand in hand, they wandered away. Presently they entered a path which led through the woods. "This is the way my sister goes to her lookout tree," said the little girl. "Would you like to see that tree?" "Oh, yes," said Dickory, and he spoke the truth. "She goes up to the very top," said Lena, "to look for ships. I would never do that. I'd rather never see a ship than to climb to the top of such a tree. I'll show it to you in a minute. We're almost there." At a little distance from the rest of the forest, and upon a bluff which overlooked a stretch of lowland, and below that the bay, stood a tall tree with spreading branches and heavy foliage. "Up in the top of that is where she sits," said the girl, "and spies out for ships. That's what she's doing now. Don't you see her up there?" "Your sister in the tree!" exclaimed Dickory, and his first impulse was to retire, for it had been made quite plain to him that he was not expected to present himself to the young lady of the house, should she be on the ground or in the air. But he did not retire. A voice came to him from the tree-top, and as he looked upward, he saw the same bright face which had greeted him over the top of the bushes. Below it was a great bunch of heavy leaves. "So you've come to call on me, have you?" said the lady in the tree. "I am glad to see you, but I'm sorry that I cannot ask you to come upstairs. I am not receiving." "He could not come up if he wanted to," said Lena. "He couldn't climb a tree like that." "And he doesn't want to," cried the nymph of the bay tree. "I have been up here all morning," said she, "looking for ships, but not one have I seen." "Isn't that a tiresome occupation?" said Dickory. "Not altogether," she said. "The branches up here make a very nice seat, and I nearly always bring a book with me. You will wonder how we get books, but we had a few with us when we were marooned, and since that my father has always asked for books when he has an opportunity of trading off his hides. But I have read them all over and over again, and if it were not for the ships which I expect to come here and anchor, I'm afraid I should grow melancholy." "What sort of ships do you look for?" asked Dickory, who was gazing upward with so much interest that he felt a little pain in the back of his neck, and who could not help thinking of a framed engraving which hung in his mother's little parlour, and which represented some angels composed of nothing but heads and wings. He saw no wings under the head of the charming young creature in the tree, but there was no reason which he could perceive why she should not be an angel marooned upon a West Indian island. "There are a great many of them," said she, "and they're all alike in one way. They never come." But there's one of them in particular which I look for, and look for, and look for, and which I believe that some day I shall really see. I have thought about that ship so often, and I have dreamed about it so often, that I almost know it must come." "Is it an English ship?" asked Dickory, speaking with some effort, for he found that the girl's voice came down much more readily than his went up. "I don't know," said she, "but I suppose it must be, for otherwise I should not understand what the people on board should say to me. It is a large ship, strong and able to defend itself against any pirates. It is laden with all sorts of useful and valuable things, and among these are a great many trunks and boxes filled with different kinds of clothes. Also, there's a great deal of money kept in a box by itself, and is in charge of an agent who is bringing it out to my father, supposing him to be now settled in Barbados. This money is generally a legacy from my father from a distant relative who has recently died. On this ship there are so many delightful things that I cannot even begin to mention them." "And where is it going to?" asked Dickory. "That I don't know exactly. Sometimes I think that it is going to the island of Barbados, where we originally intended to settle. But then I imagine that there is some pleasanter place than Barbados, and if that's the case, the ship is going there." "There can be no pleasanter place than Barbados," cried Dickory. "I come from that island, where I was born. There is no land more lovely in all the West Indies." "You come from Barbados?" cried the girl. "And it really is a pleasant island?" "Most truly it is," said he, "and the great dream of my life is to get back there." Then he stopped. Was it really the dream of his life to get back there? That would depend on several things. "If, then, you tell me the truth, my ship is bound for Barbados, and if she should go, would you like to go there with us?" Dickory hesitated. "Not directly," said he. "I would first touch at Jamaica." For some moments there was no answer from the tree-top, and then came the question, "Is it a girl who lives there?" "Yes," said Dickory unguardedly, "but also I have a mother in Jamaica." "Indeed," said she, "a mother. Well, we might stop there and take the mother with us to Barbados. Would the girl want to go too?" Dickory bent his head. "Alas," said he, "I do not know." Then spoke the little Lena. "I would not bother about any particular place to go to," said she. "I'd be so glad to go anywhere that isn't here. But it is not a real ship, you know." "I don't think I will take you," called down Lucilla. "I don't want too many passengers, especially women I don't know. But I often think that there will be a gentleman passenger, one who really wants to go to Barbados and nowhere else. Sometimes he is one kind of a gentleman and sometimes another, but he is never a soldier or a sailor, but rather one who loves to stay at home. And now, sir, I think I must take my glass and try to pick out a ship from among the spots on the far distant waves." "Come on," said Lena. "Do you like to fish? Because if you do, I can take you to a good place." The rest of the day Dickory spent with Mr. Mander and his wife, who were intelligent and pleasant people. They talked of their travels, their misfortunes, and their blessings, and Dickory yearned to pour out his soul to them, but he could not do so. His woes did not belong to himself alone. They were not for the ears of strangers. He made up his mind what he would do. Until the morrow he would stay as a visitor with these most hospitable people. Then he would ask for work. He would collect firewood. He would hunt. He would fish. He would do anything. And here he would support himself until there came some merchant ship bound southward which would carry him away. If the Mander family were any way embarrassed or annoyed by his presence here, he would make a camp at a little distance and live there by himself. Perhaps the lady of the tree would kindly send him word if the ship he was looking for should come. It was about the middle of the afternoon, and Lena had dropped asleep beneath the tree where Dickory and her parents were conversing, when suddenly there rushed upon the little group a most surprising figure. At the first flash of thought, Dickory supposed that a boy from the skies had dropped among them, but in an instant he recognized the face he had seen above the bushes. It was Lucilla, the daughter of the house. Upon her head was a little straw hat, and she wore a loose tunic and a pair of sailor's trousers, which had been cut off and were short enough to show that her feet and ankles were bare. Around her waist she had a belt of skins, from which dangled a string of crimson sea beans. Her eyes were wide open, her face was pale, and she was trembling with excitement. "What do you think?" she cried, not caring who was there or who might look at her. "There's a ship at the spring, and there's a boat rowing across the bay, a boat with 4 men in it." All started to their feet. "A boat," cried Mander, "with 4 men in it? Run, my dear, to the cave. Press into its depths as far as you can. There is nothing there to be afraid of, and no matter how frightened you are, press into its most distant depths. You, sir, will remain with me, or would you rather escape? If it is a pirate ship, it may be Blackbeard who has returned." "Not so," cried Lucilla. "It is a merchant vessel, and they are making straight for the mouth of our stream." "I will stay here with you," said Dickory, "and stand by you, unless I may help your family seek the cave you speak of." "No," said Mander, "they don't need you, and if you will do so we will go down to the beach and meet these men. That will be better than to have them search for us. They will know that people live here, for my canoe is drawn up on the beach." "Is this safe?" cried Dickory. "Would it not be better for you to go with your family and hide with them? I will meet the men in the boat." No," said Mander. "If their vessel is no pirate, I do not fear them, but I will not have them here." Now, after Mander had embraced his family, they hurried away in tears, the girl Lucilla casting not one glance at Dickory. Impressed by the impulse that it was the proper thing to do, Dickory put on his coat and waistcoat, and clapped upon his head his high cocked hat. Then he rapidly followed Mander to the beach, which they reached before the boat touched the sand. When the man in the stern of the boat, which was now almost within hailing distance, saw the 2 figures run upon the beach, he spoke to the oarsmen, and they all stopped and looked around. The stop was occasioned by the sight of Dickory and his uniform, and this, under the circumstances, was enough to stop any boat's crew. Then they fell to again and pulled ashore. When the boat was beached, one of its occupants, a roughly dressed man, sprang ashore and walked cautiously towards Mander. Then he gave a great shout. "Hi ho! Hi ho!" he cried. "And Mander, this is you!" Then there was great handshaking and many words. "Excuse me, sir," said the man, raising his hat to Dickory. "It is now more than 2 years since I have seen my friend here, when he was marooned by pirates. We were all on the same merchantman, but the pirate took me along, being short of hands. I got away at last, sir," all the time addressing Dickory instead of Mander, this being respect to his rank. "And shipping on board that brig, sir, I begged it of the captain that he would drop anchor here and take in water, although I cannot say it was needed, and give me a chance to land and see if my old friend be yet alive. I knew the spot, having well noted it when Mander and his family were marooned. "And this is Lucilla's ship," said Dickory to himself. But to the sailor he said, "This is a great day for your friend and his family, but you must not lift your hat to me, for I am no officer." For a long time, at least it seemed so to Dickory, who wanted to run to the cave and tell the good news, they all stood together on the sands and talked and shook hands and laughed and were truly thankful, the men who had come in the boat as much so as those who were found on the island. It was agreed, and there was no discussion on this point, that the Mander family should be carried away in the brig, which was an English vessel bound for Jamaica, but the happy Mander could not ask any of the boat's crew to visit him at his home. Instead, he besought them to return to their vessel and bring some clothes for women, if any should be included in her cargo. "My family," said he, "are not in fit condition to venture themselves among well-clad people. They are, indeed, more like savages than am I myself." "I doubt," said Mander's friend, "if the ship carries goods of that description, but perhaps the captain might let you have a bale of cotton cloth, although I suppose—" and here he looked a little embarrassed. "Oh, we can buy it," cried Dickory, taking some pieces of gold from his pocket, being coin with which Blackbeard had furnished him, swearing that his first lieutenant could not feel like a true officer without money in his pocket. "Take this and fetch the cloth if nothing better can be had." "Thank you," cried Mander. "My wife and daughters can so fashion it into shape." "And," added Dickory, reflecting a little and remembering the general hues of Lucilla's face, "if there be choice in colours, let the cloth be pink." When Mander and Dickory reached the house, they did not stop, but hurried on to the caves, both of them together, for each thought only of the great joy they were taking with them. "Come out, come out!" shouted Mander as he ran, and before they reached the cave its shuddering inmates had hurried into the light. When the cries and the tears and the embraces were over, Lucilla first looked at Dickory. She started, her face flushed, and she was about to draw back. Then she stopped, and advancing held out her hand. "It cannot be helped," she said. "Anyway, you have seen me before, and I suppose it doesn't matter. I'm a sailor boy, and have to own up to it. I did hope you would think of me as a young lady, but we are all so happy now that that doesn't matter. Oh, father," she cried, "it can't be. We are not fit to be saved. We must perish here in our wretched rags." "Not so," cried Dickory, with a bow. "I've already bought you a gown, and I hope it is pink." As they all hurried away, the tale of the hoped-for clothes was told, and although Mrs. Mander wondered how gowns were to be made while a merchantman waited, she said nothing of her doubts, and they all ran gleefully. Lucilla and Dickory, being the fleetest, led the others, and Dickory said, "Now that I have seen you thus, I shall be almost sorry if that ship can furnish you with common clothes. What you wear becomes you so." "Oh ho!" cried Lucilla. "That's fine flattery, sir. But I am glad you said it, for that speech has made me feel more like a woman than I have felt since I first put on this sailor's toggery." In the afternoon the boat returned, Mander and Dickory watching on the beach. When it grounded, Davids, Mander's friend, jumped on shore, bearing in his arms a pile of great coarse sacks. These he threw upon the sand, and, handing to Dickory the gold pieces he had given him, said, "The captain sends word that he has no time to look over any goods to give or to sell, but he sends these sacks, out of which the women can fashion themselves gowns, and so come aboard. Then the ship can be searched for stuffs which will suit their purposes, and which they can make at their leisure. It was towards the close of the afternoon that all of the Mander family and Dickory came down to the boat, which was waiting for them. "Do you know," said Dickory, as he and Lucilla stood together on the sand, "that in that gown of grey, with the white sleeves, and the red cord around your waist, you please me better than even you did when you wore your sailor garb. And what matters it, sir, whether I please you or not?" End of chapter 28. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 29 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 29. Captain Ichabod. Kate Bonnet was indeed in a sad case. She had sailed from Kingston with high hopes and a gay heart, and before she left she had written to Master Martin Newcombe to express her joy that her father had given up his unlawful calling, and to say how she was going to sail after him, fold him in her forgiving arms, and bring him back to Jamaica, where she and her uncle would see to it that his past sins were forgiven on account of his irresponsible mind, and where, for the rest of his life, he would tread the paths of peace and probity. In this letter she had not yielded to the earnest entreaty which was really the object and soul of Master Newcombe's epistle. Many kind things she said to so kind a friend, but to his offer to make her the queen of his life she made no answer. She knew she was his very queen, but she would not yet consent to be invested with the royal robes and with the crown. And when she had reached Belize, how proudly happy she had been. She had seen her father, no longer an outlaw, honest though in mean condition, earning his bread by honorable labor. Then, with a still greater pride, she had seen him clad as a noble gentleman, and bearing himself with dignity and high complacence. What a figure he would have made among the fine folks who were her uncle's friends in Kingston and in Spanish Town. But all this was over now. With his own hand he had told her that once again she was a pirate's daughter. She went below to her cabin, where, with wet cheeks, Dame Charter attended her. Mr. Delaplaine was angry, intensely angry. Such a shameful, wicked trick had never before been played upon a loving daughter. There were no words in which to express his most justifiable wrath. Again he went to the town to learn more, but there was nothing more to learn except that some people said they had reason to believe that Bonnet had gone to follow Blackbeard. From things they had heard, they supposed that the vessel, which had sailed away in the night, had gone to offer herself as consort to the Revenge, to rob and burn in the company of that notorious ship. There was no satisfaction in this news for the heart of the good merchant, and when he returned to the brig and sought his niece's cabin, he had no words with which to cheer her. All he could do was to tell her the little he had learned and to listen to her supplications. "Oh, uncle," she exclaimed, "we must follow him. We must take him. We must hold him. I care not where he is, even if it be in the company of the dreadful Blackbeard. We must take him. We must hold him. And this time we must carry him away, no matter whether he will or not. I believe there must be some spark of feeling, even in the heart of a bloody pirate, which will make him understand a daughter's love for her father, and he will let me have mine. Oh, uncle, we were very wrong. When he was here with us, we should have taken him then. We should have shut him up. We should have sailed with him to Kingston." All this was very depressing to the soul of Kate's loving uncle, for how was he to sail after her father and take him and hold him and carry him away? He went away to talk to the captain of the Belinda, but that tall seaman shook his head. His vessel was not ready yet to sail, being much delayed by the flight of Bonnet, and, moreover, he vowed that, although he was as bold a seaman as any, he would never consent to set out upon such an errand as the following of Blackbeard. It was terrifying enough to be in the same bay with him, even though he were engaged in business with the pirate, for no one knew what strange freak might at any time suggest itself to the soul of that most bloody roisterer. But as to following him, it was like walking into an alligator's jaws. He would take his passengers back to Kingston, but he could not sail upon any wild cruises, nor could he leave Belize immediately. But Kate took no notice of all this when her uncle had told it to her. She did not wish to go back to Jamaica. She did not wish to wait at Belize. It was a clamorous longing of her heart to go after her father and to find him wherever he might be, and she did not care to consider anything else. Dame Charter added also her supplications. Her boy was with Blackbeard, and she wished to follow the pirate's ship, even if she should never see Major Bonnet, whom she loathed and despised, though never saying so. She would find her Dickory. She, too, believed there must be some spark of feeling, even in a bloody pirate's heart, which would make him understand the love of a mother for her son, and he would let her have her boy. Mr. Delaplaine sat brooding on the deck. The righteous anger kindled by the conduct of his brother-in-law, and his grief for the poor stricken women sobbing in the cabin, combined together to throw him into the most dolorous state of mind, which was aggravated by the knowledge that he could do nothing except to wait until the Belinda sailed back to Jamaica, and to go to Jamaica in her. As the unhappy merchant sat thus, his face buried in his hands, a small boat came alongside, and a passenger mounted to the deck. This person, after asking a few questions, approached Mr. Delaplaine. "I have come, sir, to see you," he said. "I am Captain Ichabod of the sloop Restless." Mr. Delaplaine looked up in surprise. "That is a pirate ship," said he. "Yes," said the other, "I'm a pirate." The newcomer was a tall young man, with long dark hair, and with well-made features, and a certain diffidence in his manner which did not befit his calling. Mr. Delaplaine rose. This was his first private interview with a professional sea robber, and he did not know exactly how to demean himself, but as his visitor's manner was quiet, and as he came on board alone, it was not to be supposed that his intentions were offensive. "And you wish to see me, sir?" said he. "Yes," said Captain Ichabod. "I thought I'd come over and talk to you. I don't know you, bedad, but I know all about you, and I saw you and your family when you came to town to visit that old fox, bedad, that sugar planter that Captain Blackbeard used to call Sir Nightcap. Not a bad joke either, bedad. I have heard of a good many dirty, mean things that people in my line of business have done, but, bedad, I never did hear of any captain who was dirty and mean to his own family. Fine people, too, who come out to do the right thing by him, after he had been cleaned out, bedad, by one of his brothers of the coast. A rare sort of brother, bedad, don't you say so?" "You are right, sir," said Mr. Delaplaine, "in what you say of the wild conduct of my brother-in-law Bonnet. It pleases me, sir, to know that you condemn it." Condemn! I should say so, bedad, answered Captain Ichabod. And I came over here to say to you, that is, just to mention, not knowing, of course, what you'd think about it, bedad, that I'm going to start on a cruise tomorrow. That is, as soon as I can get it in my water and my stores, bedad, water anyway. And if you and your ladies might happen to fancy it, bedad, I'll be glad to take you along. I've heard that you are in a bad case here, the captain of this brig being unable or quite unwilling to take you where you want to go. But where are you going, sir? In great surprise. Anywhere, said Captain Ichabod. Anywhere you'd like to go. I'm starting out on a cruise. And a cruise with me means anywhere. And my opinion is, sir, that if you want to come up with that crack-brained sugar planter, you'd better follow Blackbeard. And the best place to find him will be on the Carolina coast. That's his favorite hunting ground, bedad, and I expect the sugar planter is with him by this time. But will not that be dangerous, sir? Asked Mr. Delaplaine. Oh, no, said the other. I know Blackbeard, and we have played many a game together. You and your family need not have anything to do with it. I'll board the Revenge, and you may wager, bedad, that I'll bring Sir Nightcap back to you by the ear. But there's another, said Delaplaine. There's a young man belonging to my party. Oh, yes, I know, said the other. The young fellow Blackbeard took away with him. Clapped a cocked hat on him, bedad. That was a good joke. I will bring him too. One old man, one young man. I'll fetch 'em both. Then I'll take you all where you want to go. That is, as near as I can get to it, bedad. Now, you tell your ladies about this, and I'll have my sloop cleaned up a bit, and as soon as I can get my water on board, I'm ready to hoist anchor. But look you, sir, exclaimed Mr. Delaplaine, this is a very important matter, and cannot be decided so quickly. Oh, don't mention it, said Captain Ichabod. Just you tell your ladies all about it, and I'll be ready to sail almost any time tomorrow. But, sir, cried the merchant. Very good, said the pirate captain. You talk it over. I'm going to the town now, and I'll row out to you this afternoon and get your instructions. And with this he got over the side. Mr. Delaplaine said nothing of this visit, but waited on deck until the captain came on board, and then many were the questions he asked about the pirate Ichabod. Well, well, the captain exclaimed. That's just like him. He's a rare one. Ichabod is not his name, of course, and I'm told he belongs to a good English family, a younger son, and having taken his inheritance, he invested it in a sloop and turned pirate. He has had some pretty good fortune, I hear, in that line, but it hasn't profited him much, for he is a terrible gambler, and all that he makes by his prizes he loses at cards, so he is nearly always poor. Blackbeard sometimes helps him, so I have heard, which he ought not to do, for the old pirate has won bags of money from him. But he is known as a good fellow, and to be trusted. I have heard of his sailing a long way back to Belize to pay a gambling debt he owed, he having captured a merchantman in the meantime. Very honourable indeed, remarked Mr. Delaplaine. As pirates go, a white crow, said the other. Now, sir, if you and your ladies want to go to Blackbeard, and a rare desire is that, I swear you cannot do better than let Captain Ichabod take you. You will be safe, I am sure of that, and there is every reason to think he will find his man. When Mr. Delaplaine went below with his extraordinary news, Dame Charter turned pale and screamed. "Sail in a pirate ship!" she cried. I have seen the men belonging to one of them, and as to going on board and sailing with them, I'd rather die just where I am." To the good dame's astonishment and that of Mr. Delaplaine, Kate spoke up very promptly. "But you cannot die here, Dame Charter, and if you ever want to see your son again, you have got to go to him, which is also the case with me and my father. And, as there is no other way for us to go, I say, let us accept this man's offer, if he be what my uncle thinks he is. After all, it might be as safe for us on board his ship as to be on a merchantman and be captured by pirates, which would be likely enough in those regions where we are obliged to go. And so I say let us see the man, and if he don't frighten us too much, let us sail with him and get my father and Dickory." "It would be a terrible danger, said Mr. Delaplaine. "But, uncle," urged Kate, "everything is a terrible danger in the search we're upon. Let us then choose a danger that we know something about, and which may serve our needs, rather than one of which we're ignorant and which cannot possibly be of any good to us." It was actually the fact that the little party in the cabin had not finished talking over this most momentous subject before they were informed that Captain Ichabod was on deck. Up they went, Dame Charter ready to faint. But she did not do so. When she saw the visitor, she thought it could not be the pirate captain, but someone whom he had sent in his place. He was more soberly dressed than when he first came on board, and his manners were even milder. The mind of Kate Bonnet was so worked up by the trouble that had come upon her that she felt very much as she did when she hung over the side of her father's vessel at Bridgetown, ready to drop into the darkness and the water when the signal should sound. She had an object now, as she had had then, and again she must risk everything. On her second look at Captain Ichabod, which embarrassed him very much, she was ready to trust him. "Dame Charter," she whispered, "we must do it or never see them again." So, when they had talked about it for a quarter of an hour, it was agreed that they would sail with Captain Ichabod. When the sloop Restless made ready to sail the next day, there was a fine flurry in the harbour. Nothing of the kind had ever before happened there. 2 ladies and a most respectable old gentleman sailing away under the skull and crossbones. That was altogether new in the Caribbean Sea. To those who talked to him about his quixotic expedition, Captain Ichabod swore, and at times, as many men knew, he was a great hand at being in earnest, that if he carried not his passengers through their troubles and to a place of safety, the Restless and all on board of her should mount to the skies in 1,000 bits. Although this alternative would not have been very comforting to said passengers if they had known of it, it came from Captain Ichabod's heart, and showed what sort of a man he was. Old Captain Sorby came to the Restless in a boat, and having previously washed one hand, came on board and bade them all good-bye with great earnestness. "You will catch him," he said to Kate, "and my advice to you is, when you get him, hang him. That's the only way to keep him out of mischief. But as you are his daughter, you may not like to string him up. So I say put irons on him. If you don't, he'll be playin' you some other wild trick. He is not fit for a pirate, anyway, and he ought to be taken back to his calves and his chickens." Kate did not resent this language. She even smiled, a little sadly. She had a great work before her, and she could not mind trifles. None of the other pirates came on board, for they were afraid of Sorby, and when that great man had made the round of the decks, and had given Captain Ichabod some bits of advice, he got down into his boat. The anchor was weighed, the sails hoisted, and, Amid shouts and cheers from a dozen small boats containing some of the most terrible and bloody sea robbers who had ever infested the face of the waters, the Restless sailed away. The only pirate ship which had, perhaps, ever left port, followed by blessings and goodwill. Goodwill, although the words which expressed it were curses and the men who waved their hats were blasphemers and cutthroats. Away sailed our gentle and most respectable party, with the Jolly Roger floating boldly high above them. Kate, looking skyward, noticed this and took courage to bewail the fact to Captain Ichabod. He smiled. "When we're in sight of my brethren of the coast," he said, "our skull and bones must wave, but when we're well out at sea we will run up an English flag, if it please you." End of chapter 29. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 30 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 30. Dame Charter Makes a Friend. Captain Ichabod was in a high feather. He whistled, he sang, and he kept his men cleaning things. All that he could do for the comfort of his passengers he did, even going so far as to drop as many of his bedads as possible. Whenever he had an opportunity, and these came frequently, he talked to Mr. Delaplaine, addressing a word or two to Kate if he thought she looked gracious. For the first day or two Dame Charter kept below. She was afraid of the men, and did not even want to look at them if she could help it. "But the good woman's all wrong," said Captain Ichabod to Mr. Delaplaine. "My men would not hurt her. They're not the most tremendous kind of pirates, anyway, for I could not afford that sort. I have often thought that I could make more profitable voyages if I had a savager lot of men. I'll tell you, sir, we once tried to board a big Spanish galleon, and the beastly foreigners beat us off, bedad, and we had a hard time of it getting away. There are 3 or 4 good fellows in the crew, tough old rascals who came with the sloop when I bought her, but most of my men are but poor knaves, and not to be afraid of." This comfort Mr. Delaplaine kept to himself, and on the second day out, the food which was served to him being most wretchedly cooked, Dame Charter ventured into the galley to see if she could do anything in the way of improvement. "I think you may eat this," she said when she returned to Kate, "but I don't think that anything on board is fit for you. When I went to the kitchen, I came near dropping dead right in the doorway. That cook, Mistress Kate, is the most terrible creature of all the pirates that ever were born. His eyes are blistering green, and his beard is all twisted into points, with the ends stuck fast with blood which has never been washed off. He roars like a lion, with shining teeth, but he speaks very fair, Mistress Kate. You would be amazed to hear how fair he speaks. He told me, and every word he said set my teeth on edge with its grating, that he wanted to know how I liked the meals cooked, that he would do it right if there were things on board to do it with, which there are not, Mistress Kate, and when he was beating up the batter for me, and I asked him if he was not tired working so hard, he pulled up his sleeve and showed me his arm, which was like a horse's leg, all covered with hair, and asked me if I thought it was likely he could tear himself with a spoon. I'm sure he would give us better food if he could, for he leaned over and whispered to me, like a gust of wind coming in through the door, that the captain was in a very hard case, having lately lost everything he had at the gaming table, and therefore had not the money to store the ship as he would have done. "Oh, don't talk about that, Dame Charter," said Kate. "If we can get enough to eat, no matter what it is, we must be satisfied and think only of our great joy in sailing to my father and to your Dickory." That afternoon Captain Ichabod found Kate by herself on deck, and he made bold to sit down by her, and before he knew what he was about, he was telling her his whole story. She listened carefully to what he said. He touched but lightly upon his wickedness, although they were plain enough to any listener of sense, and bemoaned his fearful passion for gaming, which was sure to bring him to misery one day or another. "When I have staked my vessel and have lost it," said he, "then there will be an end of me." "But why don't you sell your vessel before you lose it," said Kate, "and become a farmer?" His eyes brightened. "I never thought of that," said he. "Bedad, excuse me, miss, some day when I've got a little together and can pay my men, I'll sell this sloop, and buy a farm, bedad. I beg your pardon, miss, I'll buy a farm." Kate smiled, but it was easy to see that Captain Ichabod was in earnest. The next day Captain Ichabod came to Mr. Delaplaine, and took him to one side. "I want to speak to you," he said, "about a bit of business. You may have noticed, sir, that we are somewhat short of provisions, and the way of it is this. The night before we sailed, hoping to make a bold stroke at the card table, and thereby fit out my vessel in a manner suitable to the entertainment of a gentleman and ladies, I lost every penny I had. I did hope that our provisions would last us a few days longer, but I am disappointed, sir. That cook of mine, who is a soft-hearted fellow, his neck always ready for a heel of a woman, has thrown overboard even the very stores we had left for you, the good Dame Charter having told him they were not fit to eat. And more, sir, even my men are grumbling. So I thought I would speak to you and explain that it would be necessary for us to overhaul a merchantman and replenish our food supply. It can be done very quietly, sir, and I don't think that even the ladies need be disturbed." Mr. Delaplaine stared in amazement. "Do you mean to say," he exclaimed, "that you want me to consent to your committing piracy for our benefit?" "Yes, sir," answered the captain. "That's what I suppose you would call it, but that's my business." "Now, sir, I wish you to know that I am a Christian and a gentleman," said Mr. Delaplaine. "That's all very true, bedad," said Captain Ichabod, "but you're also another thing. You're a human being, and you must eat." "This is terrible," exclaimed the merchant, "that at my time of life I should consent to a felony at sea, and to profit by it. I cannot bear to think of the wickedness and the disgrace of it." "Most respected sir," said Ichabod, "if the fellows behave themselves properly and don't offer to fight us, then there'll be no wickedness, bedad. I can make a good enough show of men to frighten any ordinary merchant crew, so that not a blow need be struck, and that is what I expect to do, sir. I would not have any disturbance before ladies. You may be sure of that, bedad. We bear down upon a vessel, we order her to surrender, we take what we want, and we let her go. Truly, there's no wickedness in that. And as for the disgrace, we can all better bear that than starve." Mr. Delaplaine looked at the pirate without a word. He could not comprehend how a man with such a frank and honest face could thus avow his dishonest principles. But as he gazed and wondered, the thought of a scheme flashed across the mind of the merchant, a thoroughly businesslike scheme, This bold young pirate captain might seize upon such supplies as they were in need of, but he, Felix Delaplaine, of Spanish Town, Jamaica, would pay for them. Thus might their necessities be relieved, and their consciences kept clean. But he said nothing of this to Ichabod. The pirate might deem such a proceeding unprofessional and interpose some objection. Payment would be the merchant's part of the business, and he would attend to it himself. A look of resignation now came over Mr. Delaplaine's face. "Captain," said he, "I must yield to your reason. It is absolutely necessary that we shall not starve." Ichabod's face shone, and he held out his hand. "Bedad, sir," he cried, "I honour you as a bold gentleman and a kind one. I will instantly lay my course somewhat to the eastward, and I promise you, sir, it will not be long before we run across some of these merchant fellows. I beg you, sir, speak to your ladies and tell them that there will be no unpleasant commotion. We may draw our swords and make a fierce show, but, bedad, I don't believe there will be any fighting. We shall want so little, for I would not attempt to take a regular prize with ladies on board, that the fellows will surely deliver what we demand, the quicker to make an end of it." "If you are perfectly sure," said Mr. Delaplaine, "that you can restrain your men from violence, I would like to be a member of your boarding party. It would be a rare experience for me." Now Captain Ichabod fairly shouted with delight. "Bravo, bravo!" he exclaimed. "I didn't dream, sir, that you were a man of such noble spirit. You shall go with us, sir. Your presence will aid greatly in making our hoped-for capture a most orderly affair. No one can look upon you, bedad, without knowing that you are a high-minded and honourable man, and would not take a box or case from any one if you did not need it. Now, sir, we shall put about, and by good fortune we may soon sight a merchantman. Even if it be but a coastwise trader, it may serve our purpose." Mr. Delaplaine, with something of a smile upon his sedate face, hurried to Kate, who was upon the quarter-deck. "My dear, we are about to introduce a little variety into our dull lives. As soon as we can overhaul a merchantman, we shall commit a piracy. But don't turn pale, I have arranged it all." "You!" exclaimed the wide-eyed Kate. "Yes," said her uncle, and he told her his tale. "And remember this, my dear," he added, "if we cannot pay, we do not eat. I shall be as relentless as the bloody Blackbeard. If they take not my money, I shall swear to Ichabod that we touch not their goods." "And you are sure," she said, "that there will be no bloodshed?" "I vouch for that," said he, "for I shall lead the boarding party." She took him by both hands. "Why?" she said. "It need be no more than laying in goods from a storehouse, and I cannot but be glad, dear uncle, for I am so very, very hungry." Now Dame Charter came running and puffing. "Do you know," she cried, "that there is to be a piracy? The word has just been passed and the cook told me. There is to be no bloodshed, and the other ship will not be burned and the people will not be made to walk a plank. The captain has given those orders, and he is very firm, swearing, I am told, much more than is his wont. It is dreadful, it is awful just to think about. But the provisions are gone, and it is absolutely necessary to do something, and it will really be very exciting. The cook tells me he will put me in a good place where I cannot be hurt, and where I shall see everything. And, Mistress Kate and Master Delaplaine, I dare say he can take care of you too." Kate looked at her uncle as if to ask if she might tell the good woman what sort of piracy this was to be, but he shook his head. It would not do to interfere any more than was necessary with the regular progress of events. The captain came up, excited. "Even now, bedad," he cried, "there are 2 sails in sight, one far north, and the other to the eastward, beating up this way. This one we shall make for. We have the wind with us, which is a good thing, for the Restless is a bad sailor, and has lost many a prize through that fault. And now, miss," he said, addressing Kate, "I shall have to ask your leave to take down that English flag, and run up our Jolly Roger. It will be necessary, for if the fellows fear not our long guns, they may change their course and get away from us." "That will be right," said Kate. "If we are going to be pirates, we might as well be pirates out and out." Captain Ichabod glowed with delight. What a girl this was, and what an uncle! It was not long, for the Restless had a fair wind, before the sail to the eastward came fully into sight. She was, in good truth, a merchantman, and not a large one. Dame Charter, very much excited, wondered what she would have on board. "The cook tells me," she said to Kate, "that sometimes ships from the other side of the ocean carry the most astonishing and beautiful things." "But we shall not see these things," said Kate, "even if that ship carries them. We shall take but food, and shall not unnecessarily despoil them of that. We may be pirates, but we shall not be wicked." "It is hard to see the difference," said Dame Charter with a sigh, "but we must eat. The cook tells me that they have made peaceful prizes before now. This they do when they want some particular thing, such as food or money, and care not for the trouble of stripping the ship, putting all on board to death, and then setting her afire. The cook never does any boarding himself, so he says, but he stands on the deck here, armed with his great axe, which likes him better than a cutlass, and no matter what happens, he defends his kitchen." "From his looks," said Kate, "I should imagine him to be the fiercest fighter among them all." "That is not so," said Dame Charter. "He tells me that he is of a very peaceable mind, and would never engage in any broils or fights if he could help it. Look, look!" she cried. "They're running out their long brass guns. And do you see that other ship? How her sails are fluttering in the wind? And there, that little spot at the top of her mast, that's her flag, and it's coming down. Down, down it comes, and I must run to the cook and ask him what will happen next." End of chapter 30. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 31 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 31. Mr. Delaplaine leads a boarding party. Steadily southward sailed the brig Black Swan, which bore upon its decks the happy Mander family, and our poor friend Dickory, carrying with him his lifelong destiny in the shape of the blood-stained letter from Captain Vince. The sackcloth draperies of Lucilla, with the red cord lightly tied about them, had given place to a very ordinary gown fashioned by her mother and herself, which added so few charms to her young face and sparkling eyes that Dickory often thought that he wished there were some bushes on deck so that she might stand behind them and let him see only her face, as he had seen it when first he met her. but he saw the pretty face a great deal, for Lucilla was very anxious to know things, and asked many questions about Barbados, and also asked if there was any probability that the brig would go straight on to that lovely island without bothering to stop at Jamaica. It was during such talks as this that Dickory forgot, when he did forget, the blood-stained letter that he carried with him always. Our young friend still wore the naval uniform, although in coming on the brig he had changed it for some rough sailor's clothes, but Lucilla had besought him to be again a brave lieutenant. They sailed, and there was but little wind, and that from the south and against them. But Lucilla did not complain at their slow progress. The slowest vessel in the world was preferable just now to a desert island which never moved. Davids was at the wheel, and Mander stood near him. These old friends had not yet finished talking about what had happened in the days since they had seen each other. Mrs. Mander sat not far away, still making clothes, and the little Lena was helping her in her childlike way. Lucilla and Dickory were still talking about Barbados. There never was a girl who wanted to know so much about an island as that girl wanted to know about Barbados. Suddenly there was a shout from above. "What's that?" asked Mander. "A sail," said Davids, peering out over the sea but able to see nothing. Lucilla and Dickory did not cease talking. At that moment Lucilla did not care greatly about sails. There was so much to be said about Barbados. There was a good deal of talking forward, and after a while the captain walked to the quarter-deck. He was a gruff man, and his face was troubled. "I am sorry to say," he growled, "that the ship we have sighted is a pirate. She flies the black flag." Now there was no more talk about Barbados, or what had happened to old friends, and the sewing dropped on the deck. Those poor Manders were chilled to the soul. Were they again to be taken by pirates? "Captain," cried Mander, "what can we do? Can we run away from them?" "We could not run away from their guns," growled the captain, "and there is nothing to do. They intend to take this brig, and that's the reason they have run up their skull and bones. They are bearing directly down upon us with a fair wind. They will be firing a gun presently, and then I shall lay to and wait for them." Mander stepped towards Dickory and Lucilla. His voice was husky as he said, "We cannot expect, my dear, that we shall again be captured by forbearing pirates. I shall kill my wife and little daughter rather than they shall fall into the bloody hands of ordinary pirates, and to you, sir, I will commit the care of my Lucilla. If this vessel is delivered over to a horde of savages, I pray you, plunge your dirk into her heart." "Yes," said Lucilla, clinging to the arm of Dickory. "If those fierce pirates shall attack us, we will die together." Dickory shook his head. In an awful moment such as this he could hold out no illusions. "No," said he, "I cannot die with you. I have a duty before me, and until it is accomplished I cannot willingly give up my life. I must rather be even a pirate's slave than that. But I will accept your father's charge. Should there be need, I will kill you." "Thank you very much," said Lucilla coolly. To the surprise of the people on the Black Swan there came no shot from the approaching pirate, but as she still bore down upon them, running before the wind, the captain of the brig lay to and lowered his flag. Submission now was all there was before them. No man on the brig took up arms, nor did the crew form themselves into any show of resistance. That would have but made matters worse. As the pirate vessel came on, nearer and nearer. A great number of men could be seen stretched along her deck, and some brass cannon were visible trained upon the unfortunate brig. But, to the surprise of the captain of the Black Swan, and of nearly everybody on board of her, the pirate did not run down upon her to make fast and board. Instead of that, she put about into the wind, and lay to less than 1/4 of a mile away. Then 2 boats were lowered and filled with men, who rowed towards the brig. "They have special reasons for our capture," said the captain to those who were crowding about him. "He may well be laden now with plunder, and comes to us for our gold and silver, or it may be that he merely wants the brig. If that be so, he can quickly rid himself of us." That was a cruel speech when women had to hear it, but the captain was a rough fellow. The boats came on as quietly as if they were about to land at a neighbouring pier. Dickory and Lucilla cautiously peeped over the rail, Dickory without his hat, and Lucilla hiding herself, all but a part of her face, behind him. The Manders crouched together on the deck, the father with glaring eyes and a knife in his hand. The crew stood, with their hats removed and their chins lowered, waiting for what might happen next. Up to this time Dickory had shown no signs of fear, although his mind was terribly tossed and disturbed. For whatever might happen to him, it possibly would be the end of that mission which was now the only object of his life. But he grated his teeth together and awaited his fate. But now, as the boats came nearer, he began to tremble, and gradually his knees shook under him. "I would not have believed that he was such a coward as that," thought Lucilla. The boats neared the ship and were soon made fast. Every help was offered by the crew of the brig, and not a sign of resistance was shown. The leader of the pirates mounted to the deck, followed by the greater part of his men. For a moment Captain Ichabod glanced about him, and then, addressing the captain of the brig, he said, "This is all very well. I am glad to see that you have sense enough to take things as you find them, and not to stir up a fracas and make trouble. I overhauled you that I might lay in a stock of provisions, and some wine and spirits besides, having no desire, if you treat us rightly, to despoil you further. So, we shall have no more words about it, bedad, and if you will set your men to work to get on deck such stores as my quartermaster here may demand of you, we shall get through this business quickly. In the meantime, lower 2 or 3 boats, so that your men can row the goods over to my vessel." The captain of the Black Swan simply bowed his head and turned away to obey orders, while Captain Ichabod stepped a little aft and began to survey the captured vessel. As soon as his back was turned, the captain of the brig was approached by a very respectable, elderly gentleman, apparently not engaged either in the mercantile marine or in piratical pursuits, who stopped him and said, "Sir, my name is Felix Delaplaine, merchant of Spanish Town, Jamaica. I am, against my will, engaged in this piratical attack upon your vessel, but I wish to assure you privately that I will not consent to have you robbed of your property, and that, although some of your provisions may be taken by these pirates, I here promise, as an honourable gentleman, to pay you the full value of all that they seize upon." The captain of the Black Swan had no opportunity to make an answer to this most extraordinary statement, for at that moment a naval officer, shouting at the top of his voice, came rushing towards the respectable gentleman who had just been making such honourable proposals. Almost at the same moment there was a great shout from Captain Ichabod, who, drawing his cutlass from its sheath, raised the glittering blade and dashed in pursuit of the naval gentleman. "Hold there! Hold there!" cried the pirate. "Don't you touch him! Don't you lay your hand upon him!" But Ichabod was not quick enough. Dickory, swift as a stag, stretched out both his arms and threw them around the neck of the amazed Mr. Delaplaine. Now the pirate Ichabod reached the two. His great sword went high in the air, and was about to descend upon the naval person, whoever he was, who had made such an unprovoked attack upon his honoured passenger, when his arm was caught by some one from behind. Turning, with a great curse, his eyes fell upon the face of a young girl. "Oh, don't kill him! Don't kill him!" she cried. "He will hurt nobody. He is only hugging the old gentleman." Captain Ichabod looked from the girl to the two men, who were actually embracing each other. Dickory's back was towards him, but the face of Mr. Delaplaine fairly glowed with delight. "Oh ho!" said Ichabod, turning to Lucilla. "And what does this mean, bedad?" "I don't know," she answered, "but the gentleman in the uniform is a good man. Perhaps the other one is his father." "To my eyes," said Captain Ichabod, "this is a most fearsome mix." The Mander family, and nearly everybody else on board, crowded about the little group, gazing with all their eyes, but asking no questions. "Captain Ichabod!" exclaimed Mr. Delaplaine, holding Dickory by the hand. "This is one of the two persons you were taking us to find. This is Dickory Charter, the son of good Dame Charter, now on your vessel. He went away with Blackbeard, and we were in search of him." "Oh ho!" cried Captain Ichabod. "By my life I believe it. That's the young fellow that Blackbeard dressed up in a cocked hat and took away with him." "I am the same person, sir," said Dickory. "So far so good," said Captain Ichabod. "I am very glad that I did not bring down my cutlass on you, which I should have done, bedad, had it not been for this young woman." Now up spoke Mr. Delaplaine. "We have found you, Dickory," he cried. "But what can you tell us of Major Bonnet?" "Aye," said Captain Ichabod. "There's another one we're after. Where's the runaway Sir Nightcap?" "Alas," said Dickory, "I do not know. I escaped from Blackbeard, and since that day have heard nothing. I had supposed the Captain Bonnet was in your company, Mr. Delaplaine." Now the captain of the Black Swan pushed himself forward. "Is it Captain Bonnet, lately of the pirate ship Revenge, that you're talking about?" he asked. "If so, I may tell you something of him. I am lately from Charlestown, and the talk there was that Blackbeard was lying outside the harbour in Stede Bonnet's old vessel, and that Bonnet had lately joined him. I did not venture out of port until I had certain news that these pirates had sailed northward. They had 2 or 3 ships, and the talk was that they were bound to the Virginias, and perhaps still farther north. They were fitted out for a long cruise." "Gone again!" exclaimed Mr. Delaplaine in a hoarse voice. "Gone again!" Captain Ichabod's face grew clouded. "Gone north of Charlestown!" he exclaimed. "That's bad, bedad. That's very bad. You are sure he did not sail southward?" he asked of the captain of the brig. That gruff mariner was in a strange state of mind. He had just been captured by a pirate, and in the next moment had made what might be a very profitable sale to a respectable merchant, of the goods the pirate was about to take from him. Moreover, the said pirate seemed to be in the employ of said merchant, and, altogether, things seemed to him to be in as fearsome a mix as they had seemed to Captain Ichabod. But he brought his mind down to the question he had been asked. "No doubt about that," said he. "There were some of his men in the town, for they are afraid of nobody, and they were not backward in talking." "That upsets things badly," said Captain Ichabod, without unclouding his brow. "With my slow vessel and my empty purse, bedad, I don't see how I am ever going to take Blackbeard if he has gone north. Finding Blackbeard would have been a handful of trumps to me, but the game seems to be up, bedad." The captain of the brig and Ichabod's quartermaster went away to attend to the transfer of the needed goods to the Restless. Mander and his wife and little daughter were standing together gazing with amazement at the strange pirates who had come aboard, while Lucilla stepped up to Dickory, who stood silent, with his eyes on the deck. "Can you tell me what this means?" said she. For a moment he did not answer, and then he said, "I don't know everything myself, but I must presently go on board that vessel." "What?" exclaimed Lucilla, stepping back. "Is she there?" "Yes," said Dickory. End of chapter 31. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 32 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 32. The Delivery of the Letter. The sea was smooth and the wind light, and the transfer of provisions from the Black Swan to the pirate sloop, which two ships now lay as near each other as safety would permit, was accomplished quietly. During the progress of the transfer, Captain Ichabod's boat was rowed back to his ship, and its arrival was watched with great interest by everybody on board that pirate sloop. Kate and Dame Charter, as well as all the men who stood looking over the rail, were amazed to see a naval officer accompanying the captain and Mr. Delaplaine on their return. But that amazement was greatly increased when that officer, as soon as he set foot upon the deck, removed his hat and made directly for Dame Charter, who, with a scream loud enough to frighten the fishes, enfolded him in her arms and straightway fainted. It was like a sun coming out of the sea, sure enough, as she afterwards stated. Kate, recognizing Dickory, hurried to him with a scream of her own and both hands outstretched. But the young fellow, who seemed greatly distressed at the unconscious condition of his mother, did not greet Mistress Bonnet with the enthusiastic delight which might have been expected under the circumstances. He seemed troubled and embarrassed, which, perhaps, was not surprising, for never before had he seen his mother faint. Kate was about to offer some assistance, but as the good dame now showed signs of returning consciousness, she thought it would be better to leave the two together, and in a state of amazement she was hurrying to her uncle when Dickory rose from the side of his mother and stopped her. "I have a letter for you," he said in a husky voice. "A letter?" she cried. "From my father?" "No," said he, "from Captain Vince," and he handed her the blood-stained missive. Kate turned pale and stared at him. Here was horrible mystery. The thought flashed through the young girl's mind that the wicked captain had killed her father and had written to tell her so. "Is my father dead?" she gasped. "Not that I know of," said Dickory. "Where is he?" she cried. "I do not know," was the answer. She stood, holding the letter, while Dickory returned to his mother. Mr. Delaplaine saw her standing thus, pale and shocked, but he did not hasten to her. He had sad things to say to her, for his practical mind told him that it would not be possible to continue the search for her father, he having put himself out of the reach of Captain Ichabod and his inefficient sloop. If Dickory had said anything about her father which had so cast her down, how much harder would it be for him when he had to tell her the whole truth. But Kate did not wait for further speech from anybody. She gave a great start, and then rushed down the companionway to her cabin. There, with her door shut, she opened the letter. This was the letter, written in lead pencil, in an irregular but bold hand, with some letters partly dimmed where the paper had been damp. "At the very end of my life I write to you that you have escaped the fiercest love that ever a man had for a woman. I shall carry this love with me to hell, if it may be, but you have escaped it. This escape is a blessing, and now that I cannot help it, I give it to you. Had I lived, I should have shed the blood of everyone whom you loved to gain you, and you would have cursed me. So love me now for dying. Yours, anywhere and always, Christopher Vince." Kate put down the letter, and some colour came into her face. She bowed her head in thankful prayer. "He's dead," she said, "and now he cannot harm my father." That was the only thought she had regarding this hot-brained and infatuated lover. He was dead. Her father was safe from him. How he died, how Dickory came to bring the letter, how anything had happened that had happened except the death of Captain Vince, did not at this moment concern her. Not until now had she known how the fear of the vengeful captain of the Badger had constantly been with her. Over and over again Dickory told his tale to his mother. She interrupted him so much with her embraces that he could not explain things clearly to her, but she did not care. She had him with her. He was with her, and she had fast hold of him, and she would never let him go again. What mattered it what sort of clothes he wore, or where he had escaped from? A family on a desert island or from a pirate crew? She had him, and her happiness knew no bounds. Dickory was perfectly willing to stay with her and to talk to her. He did not care to be with anybody else, not even with Mistress Kate, who had taken so much interest in him all the time he had been away, though, of course, not so much interest as his own dear mother. Then the good Dame Charter, being greatly recovered and so happy, began to talk of herself, slipping in a disjointed way over her various experiences. She told her dear boy, in strictest confidence, that she was very much disappointed in the way pirates took ships. She thought it was going to be something very exciting that she would remember to the end of her days, and wake up in the middle of the night and scream when she thought of it, but it was nothing of the kind. Not a shot was fired, not a drop of blood shed. There was not even a shout or a yell or a scream for mercy. It was all like going into the pantry to get the flour and the sugar. She was all the time waiting for something to happen, and nothing ever did. Dickory smiled, but it was like watered milk. "I do not understand such piracy," he said. "But suppose, dear mother, that these pirates had taken that ship in the usual way, I being on board." At this he was clasped so tightly to his mother's breast that he could say no more. The boats plied steadily between the two vessels, and on one of the trips Mr. Delaplaine went over to the brig on business, and also glad to escape for a little the dreaded interview which must soon come between himself and his niece. "Now, sir," said the merchant to the captain of the brig, "you will make a bill against me for the provisions which are being taken to that pirate, and I hope you have reserved a sufficient store of food for your own maintenance until you reach a port, and that of myself and 2 women who wish to sail with you, craving most earnestly that you will land us in Jamaica, or in some place convenient of access to that island." "Which I can do," said the captain, "for I am bound to Kingston, and as to subsistence, shall have plenty." On the brig Mr. Delaplaine found Captain Ichabod, who had come over to superintend operations, and who was now talking to the pretty girl who had seized him by the arm when he was about to slay the naval officer. "I would talk with you, Captain," said the merchant, "on a matter of immediate import," and he led the pirate away from the pretty girl. The matter to be discussed was, indeed, of deep import. "I am loath to say it, sir," said Mr. Delaplaine, "when I think of the hospitality and most exceptional kindness with which you have treated me and my niece, and for which we shall feel grateful all our lives, but I think you will agree with me that it would be useless for us to pursue the search after that most reprehensible person, my brother-in-law, Bonnet. There can be no doubt, I believe, that he and Blackbeard have left the vicinity of Charlestown, and have gone, we know not where." "No doubt of that, bedad," said Ichabod, knitting his brow as he spoke. "If Blackbeard had been outside the harbour, this brig would not have been here. And therefore, sir," continued Mr. Delaplaine, "I have judged it to be wise, and indeed necessary, for us to part company with you, sir, and to take passage on this brig, which, by a most fortunate chance, is bound for Kingston. My niece, I know, will be greatly disappointed by this course of events, but we have no choice but to fall in with them." "I don't like to agree with you," said the captain, "but, bedad, I am bound to do it. I am disappointed myself, sir, but I have been disappointed so often that I suppose I ought to be used to it. If I had caught up with Blackbeard I should have been all right, and after I had settled your affairs, and I know I could have done that, I think I would have joined him. But all I can do now is to hammer along at the business, take prizes in the usual way, and wait for Blackbeard to come south again, and then I'll either sell out or join him." "It is a great pity, sir," said Mr. Delaplaine, "a great pity." "Yes, it is," interrupted Ichabod. "It's a very great pity, sir, a very great pity. If I had known more about ships when I bought the Restless, I would have had a faster craft, and by this time I might have been a man of comfortable means. But that sloop over there, bedad, is so slow, that many a time, sir, I have seen a fat merchantman sail away from her and leave us, in spite of our guns, cursing and swearing miles behind. I am sorry to have you leave me, sir, and with your ladies, but, as you say, here's your chance to get home, and I don't know when I could give you another." Mr. Delaplaine replied courteously and gratefully, and by the next boat he went back to the Restless. Captain Ichabod, his brow still clouded by the approaching separation, walked over to Lucilla, and continued his conversation with her about the island of Barbados, a subject of which he knew very little and she nothing. When Kate returned to the deck she found Dickory alone, Dame Charter having gone to talk to the cook about the wonderful things which had happened, of which she knew very little and he nothing at all. "Dickory," said Kate. "I want to talk to you, and that quickly. I have heard nothing of what has happened to you. How did you get possession of the letter you brought me? And what do you know of Captain Vince?" "I can tell you nothing," he said without looking at her, "until you tell me what I ought to know about Captain Vince." And as he said this he could not help wondering in his heart that there were no signs of grief about her. "Ought to know?" she repeated, regarding him earnestly. "Well, you and I have always been good friends, and I will tell you." And then she told him the story of the captain of the Badger, of his love-making, and of his commission to sail upon the sea and destroy the pirate ship Revenge, and all on board of her. "And now," she said, as she concluded, "I think it would be well for you to read this letter." And she handed him the missive he had carried so long and with such pain. He read the bold, uneven lines, and then he turned and looked upon her, his face shining like morning sky. "Then you have never loved him?" he gasped. "Why should I?" said Kate. In spite of the fact that there were a great many people on board that pirate sloop who might see him, in spite of the fact that there were people in boats plying upon the water who might notice his actions, Dickory fell upon his knees before Kate, and, seizing her hand, he pressed it to his lips. "Why should I?" said Kate, quietly drawing her hand from him, "for I have a devoted lover already, Master Martin Newcombe of Barbados." Dickory, repulsed, rose to his feet, but his face did not lose its glow. He had heard so much about Martin Newcombe that he had ceased to mind him. "To think of it!" he cried. "To think how I stood and watched him fight, how I admired and marvelled at his wonderful strength and skill, his fine figure, and his flashing eye. How my soul went out to him, how I longed that he might kill that scoundrel Blackbeard. And all the time he was your enemy. He was my enemy. He was a viler wretch than even the bloody pirate who killed him. Oh, Kate, Kate, if I had but known." "Miss Kate, if you please," said the girl. "And it is well, Dickory, you did not know, for then you might have jumped upon him and struck him in the back, and that would have been dishonourable." "He thought," said Dickory, not in the least abashed by his reproof, "that the Revenge was commanded by your father, for he sprang upon the deck, shouting for the captain, and when he saw Blackbeard I heard him exclaim in surprise, 'A sugar planter!'" "And he would have killed my father?" said Kate, turning pale at the thought. "Yes," replied Dickory, "he would have killed any man except the great Blackbeard. And to think of it! I stood there watching them, and wishing that vile Englishman the victory. Oh, Kate, you should have seen that wonderful pirate fight. No man could have stood before him." Then, with sparkling eyes and waving arms, he told her of the combat. When he had finished, the souls of these two young people were united in an overpowering admiration, almost reverence, for the prowess and strength of the wicked and bloody pirate who had slain the captain of the Badger. When Mr. Delaplaine came on board, Kate, who had been waiting, took him aside. "Uncle," she exclaimed, "I have great news. Captain Vince is dead. At least he came up with the Revenge, but instead of finding my father in command, he found Blackbeard, who killed him. Now my father is safe." The good man scarcely knew what to say to this bright-faced girl, whose father's safety was all the world to her. If he had heard that his worthlessness and wicked brother-in-law had been killed, it would have been trouble and sorrow for the present, but it would have been peace for the future. But he was a Christian gentleman, and a loving uncle, and he banished this thought from his heart. He listened to Kate as she rapidly went on talking, but he did not hear her. His mind was busy with the news he had to tell her, the news that she must give up her loving search and go back with him to Spanish Town. "And now, uncle," said Kate, "there's another thing I want to say to you. Since this great grief has been lifted from my soul, since I know that no wrathful and vindictive captain of a man-of-war is scouring the seas, armed with authority to kill my father and savage for his life, I feel that it is not right for me to put other people who are so good to me to sad discomfort and great expense to try to follow my father into regions far away and to us almost unknown. Some day he will come back into this part of the world, and I hope he may return disheartened and weary of his present mode of life, and then I may have a better chance of winning him back to the domestic life he used to love so much. But he is safe, uncle, and that is everything now. And so I came to say to you that I think it would be well for us to relieve this Captain Ichabod from the charges and labours he has taken upon himself for our sakes, and, if it be possible, engage that ship yonder to take us back to Jamaica. She was sailing in that direction, and her captain might be induced to touch at Kingston. This is what I have been thinking about, dear uncle, and do you not agree with me?" High rose the spirits of good Mr. Delaplaine. Banished was all the overhanging blackness of his dreaded interview with Kate. Some day he will come back into this part of the world, and I hope he may return disheartened and weary of his present mode of life, and then I may have a better chance of winning him back to the domestic life he used to love so much. But he is safe, uncle, and that is everything now. And so I came to say to you that I think it would be well for us to relieve this Captain Ichabod from the charges and labours he has taken upon himself for our sakes, and, if it be possible, engage that ship yonder to take us back to Jamaica. She was sailing in that direction, and her captain might be induced to touch at Kingston. This is what I have been thinking about, dear uncle, and do you not agree with me?" High rose the spirits of the good Mr. Delaplaine. Banished was all the overhanging blackness of his dreaded interview with Kate. The sky was bright, her soul was singing songs of joy and thankfulness, and his soul might join her. He never appreciated better than now the blessings which might be shed upon humanity by the death of a bad man. His mind even gambled a little in his relief. "But Kate," he said, "if we leave that kind Captain Ichabod, and he be not restrained by our presence, then, my dear, he will return to his former evil ways, and his next captures will not be like this one, but like ordinary piracies, sinful in every way." "Uncle," said Kate, looking up into his face, "it is too much to ask of one young girl to undertake the responsibilities of 2 pirates. I hope some day to be of benefit to my poor father, and when it comes to Captain Ichabod, kind as he has been, I am afraid I will have to let him go and manage the affairs for his soul for himself." Her uncle smiled upon her. Now that he was to go back to his home and take his dear girl with him, he was ready to smile at almost anything. That he thought one pirate much better worth saving than the other, and that his choice did not agree with that of his niece, was not for him to even think about at such a happy moment. It was not long after this conversation that the largest boat belonging to the Restless was rowed over to the brig, and in it sat not only Kate, Dame Charter, and Dickory, but Captain Ichabod, who would accompany his guests to take proper leave of them. The crew of the pirate sloop crowded themselves along her sides, and even mounted into her shrouds, waving their hat and shouting as the boat moved away. The cook was the loudest shouter, and his ragged hat waved highest, and, as Dame Charter shook her handkerchief above her head and gazed back at her savage friend, there was moisture in her eyes. Up to this moment she never would have believed that she would have grieved to depart from a pirate vessel and to leave behind a pirate cook. Lucilla watched carefully the newcomers as they ascended to the deck of the Black Swan. "That is the girl," she said to herself, "and I am not surprised." A little later she remarked to Captain Ichabod, who sat by her, "Are they mother and daughter, those two?" "Oh no," said he. "Mistress Bonnet is too fine a lady and too beautiful to be daughter of that old woman, who is her attendant and the mother of the young fellow in the cocked hat." "Too fine and beautiful," repeated Lucilla. "I greatly grieve to leave you all," continued the young pirate captain, "although some of you I have known so short a time. It will be very lonesome when I sail away, with none to speak to save the bloody dogs I command, who may yet throttle me. And it is to Barbados you go to settle with your family?" "That is our destination," said Lucilla, "but I know not if we shall find the money to settle there. We were taken by pirates and lost everything." Now the captain of the brig came up to Ichabod and informed him that the goods he demanded had been delivered on board his vessel, and that the brig was ready to sail. It was the time for leave-taking, but Ichabod was tardy. Presently he approached Kate, and drew her to one side. "Dear lady," he said, and his voice was hesitating, while a slight flush of embarrassment appeared on his face. "You may have thought, dear lady," he repeated, "you may have thought that so fair a being as yourself should have attracted during the days we have sailed together, may have attracted, bedad, I mean, the declared admiration even of a fellow like myself, we being so much together. But I had heard your story, fair lady, and of the courtship paid you by Captain Vince of the corvette Badger, whose family I knew in England, and acknowledging his superior claims, I constantly refrained, though not without great effort, I must say that much for myself, fair lady, from addressing me, I suppose you mean," said Kate. "What you say, kind captain, redounds to your honour, and I thank you for your noble consideration. But I feel bound to tell you that there was never anything between me and Captain Vince, and he is now dead." The young pirate stepped back suddenly and opened wide his eyes. "What?" he exclaimed. "And all this time you were—" "Not free," she interrupted with a smile, "for I have a lover on the island of Barbados." "Barbados," repeated Captain Ichabod, and he bade Kate a most courteous farewell. All the good-byes had been said, and good wishes had been wished, when, just as he was about to descend to his boat, Captain Ichabod turned to Lucilla. "And it is truly to Barbados you go?" he asked. "Yes," said she. "I think we shall certainly do that." Now his face flushed. "And do you care for that fellow in the cocked hat?" Here was a cruel situation for poor Lucilla. She must lie or lose 2 men. She might lose them anyway, but she would not do it of her own free will, and so she lied. "Not a whit," said Lucilla. The eyes of Ichabod brightened as he went down the side of the brig. End of Chapter 32. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 33 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 33. Blackbeard gives Greenway some difficult work. The great pirate Blackbeard, inactive and taking his ease, was seated on the quarter-deck of his fine vessel, on which he had lately done some sharp work off the harbour of Charlestown. He was now commanding a small fleet. Besides the ship on which he sailed, he had 2 other vessels, well manned and well laden with supplies from his recent captures. Satisfied with conquest, he was sailing northward to one of his favourite resorts on the North Carolina coast. To this conquering hero now came Ben Greenway, the Scotchman, touching his hat. "And what do you want?" cried the burly pirate. "Haven't they given you your prize money yet, or isn't it enough?" "Prize money!" exclaimed Greenway. "I ha' none of it, nor will I have any. What money I have, and it is but little, came to me fairly." "Oh ho!" cried Blackbeard. "And you have money then, have you? Is it enough to make it worth my while to take it?" "You can count it and see whenever you like," said Ben. "But it isna money that I came to talk to ye about. I came to ask ye, at the first convenient season, to put me on board that ship out there, that I may be in my rightful place by the side of Master Bonnet." "And what good are you to him, or he to you?" asked the pirate, with a fine long oath, "that I should put myself to that much trouble?" "I have the responsibeelity of his soul on my hands," said Ben, "and since we left Charlestown I ha' not seen him, he bein' on a ship and I on anither." "And very well that is too," said Blackbeard, "for I like each of you better separate. And now look ye, me Kirkbird, you have not done very well with your responsibeelities so far, and you might as well make up your mind to stop trying to convert that sneak of a nightcap, and take up the business of converting me. I'm in great need of it, I can tell you." "You!" cried Ben. "I tell you yes," shouted Blackbeard. "It is I, myself, that I am talking about. I want to be converted from the evil of my ways, and I have made up my mind that you shall do it. You are a good and a pious man, and it is not often that I get hold of one of that kind, or, if I do, I slice off his head before I discover his quality." "I fear me," said the truthful Scotchman, "that the job is beyond my abeelity." "Not a bit of it, not a bit of it," shouted the pirate. "I am 50 times easier to work upon than that nightcap man of yours, and 100 times better worth the trouble. I put no trust in that down-faced farmer. When he shouts loudest for the black flag, he is most likely to go into priestly orders, and the better is he reformed, the quicker is he to rob and murder. He is of the kind the devil wants, but it is of no use for any one to show him the way there. He is well able to find it for himself. But it is different with me, you canny Scotchman, it is different with me. I am an open-handed and open-mouthed scoundrel, and I never pretended to be anything else. When you begin reforming me, you will find your work half done." The Scotchman shook his head. "I fear me," he said. "No, you don't fear yourself," cried Blackbeard, "and I won't have it. I don't want any of that lazy piety on board my vessel. If you don't reform me, and do it rightly, I'll slice off both your ears." At this moment a man came aft, carrying a great tankard of mixed drink. Blackbeard took it and held it in his hand. "Now then, you balking chaplain," he cried, "here's a chance for you to begin. What would you have me do? Drain off this great mug and go slashing among my crew, or hurl it, mug and all?" "Nay, nay," cried Greenway, "but rather give half o' it to me, then will it no disturb your brain, and mine will be comforted." "Hey ho!" cried Blackbeard. "Truly you are a better chaplain than I thought you. Drain half this mug, and then, by all the powers of heaven and hell, you shall convert me. Now, look ye," said the pirate when the mug was empty, "and hear what a brave repentance I have already begun. I am tired, my gay gardener, of all these piracies. I have had enough of them. Even now my spoils and prizes are greater than I can manage, and why should I strive to make them more? I told you of my young lieutenant, who ran away and who gave his carcass to the birds of prey rather than sail with me and marry my strapping daughter. I liked that fellow, Greenway, and if he had known what was well for him, there might be some reason for me to keep on piling up goods and money, but there's cursed little reason for it now. I have merchandise of value at Belize, and much more of it in these ships, besides money from Charlestown which ought to last an honest gentleman for the rest of his days." "Ay," said Ben, "but an honest gentleman is sparing of his expenditures." "And you think I am not that kind of a man, do you?" shouted the pirate. "But let me tell you this. I am sailing now for Topsail Inlet, on the North Carolina coast, and I am going to run in there, disperse this fleet, sell my goods, and—" "Be hanged?" interpolated Greenway in surprise. "Not a bit of it, you croaking crow," roared the pirate. "Not a bit of it. Don't you know, you dullhead, that our good King George has issued a proclamation to the brethren of the coast to come in and behave themselves like honest citizens and receive their pardon? I have done that once, and so I know all about it, but I backslid, showing that my conversion was badly done." "It must have been a poor hand that did the job for ye," said Greenway, "for truly the conversion washed off in the first rain." The pirate laughed a great laugh. "The fact is," he said, "I did the work myself, and knowing nothing about it made a bad botch of it, but this time it will be different. I'm going to give the matter into your hands, and I shall expect you to do it well. If I become not an honest gentleman this time, you shall pay for it, first with your ears and then with your head." "And you're going to keep me by ye?" said Greenway, with an expression not of the best. "Truly so," said Blackbeard. "I shall make you my clerk as long as I am a pirate, for I have much writing and figuring work to be done, and after that you shall be my chaplain. And whether or not your work will be easier than it is now, it is not for me to say." The Scotchman was about to make an exclamation which might not have been complimentary, but he restrained himself. "And Master Bonnet," he asked, "if you go a piracy, he may go too, and take the oath." "Of course he may," cried the pirate, "and of course he shall. I will see to that myself. Then I will give him back his ship, for I don't want it, and let him become an honest merchant." "Give him back his ship!" exclaimed Greenway, his countenance downcast. "That will be puttin' into his hands the means of beginnin' again a life o' sin. I pray ye don't do that." Blackbeard leaned back and laughed. "I swear that I thought it would be one of the very first steps in conversion for me to give back to the fellow the ship which is his own and which I have taken from him. But fear not, my noble pirate's clerk. He is not the man that I am. He is a vile coward, and when he has taken the oath he will be afraid to break it. Moreover, and if, with that ship," said Greenway, his eyes beginning to sparkle, "he becomes an honest merchant—" "I don't trust him," said Blackbeard. "He is a knave and a sharper, and there is no truth in him." But when you have settled up my business, my clerk, and have gotten me well converted, I will send you away with him, and you shall take up again the responsibility of his soul." The Scotchman clapped his horny hands together. "And once I get him back to Bridgetown, I will burn his cursed ship." "Hey ho!" cried Blackbeard. "And that will be your way of converting him? You know your business, my royal chaplain, you know it well." And with that he gave Greenway a tremendous slap on the back which would have dashed to the deck an ordinary man. But Ben Greenway was a Scotchman, tough as a yew tree. End of chapter 33. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 34 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 34. Captain Thomas of the Royal James. When Blackbeard's little fleet anchored in Topsail Inlet, Stede Bonnet, who had not been informed of the intentions of the pirate, was a good deal puzzled. Since joining Blackbeard's fleet in the vessel which came up from Belize, Bonnet had considered himself very shabbily treated, and his reasons for that opinion were not bad. During the engagements off Charlestown, his services had not been required, and his opinion had not been consulted, Blackbeard having no use for the one and no respect for the other. The pirate captain had taken a fancy to Ben Greenway, while his contempt for the Scotchman's master increased day by day, and it was for this reason that Greenway had been taken on board the flagship, while Bonnet remained on one of the smaller vessels. Bonnet was in a discontented and somewhat sulky mood, but when Blackbeard's full plans were made known to him, and he found that he might again resume command of his own vessel, the Revenge, if he chose to do so, his eyes began to sparkle once more. Ben Greenway soon resumed his former position with Bonnet, for it did not take Blackbeard very long to settle up his affairs, and in a very short time he became tired of the work of conversion, or, to speak more correctly, of the bore of talking about it. Bonnet was glad to have the Scotchman back again, although he never ceased to declare his desire to get rid of his faithful friend and helper, for when the Revenge again came into his hands, there were many things to be done, and few people to help him do it. "It will be merchandise and fair trade this time," said Ben, "and you'll find it not so easy as your piracies, though safer, and when you're off to see the governor and have got your pardon, it'll be a happy day, Master Bonnet, for ye and for your daughter, and for your brother-in-law and everybody in Bridgetown, what either knew ye or respected ye." "No more of that," cried Bonnet. "I did not say I was going to Bridgetown, or that I wanted anybody there to respect me. It is my purpose to fit out the Revenge as a privateer and get a commission to sail in her in the war between Spain and the Allies. This will be much more to my taste, Ben Greenway, than trading in sugar and hides." Greenway was very grave. "There is so little difference," said he, "between a privateer and a pirate that it is a great strain on a common mind to keep them separate. But a commission from the king is better than a commission from the devil, and we'll hope there won't be much of a war after all is said and done." There was not much intercourse between Blackbeard and Bonnet at Topsail Inlet. The pirate was on very good terms with the authorities at that place, who for their own sakes cared not much to interfere with him, and Bonnet had his own work in hand and industriously engaged in it. He went to Bath and got his pardon. He procured a clearance for St. Thomas, where he freely announced his intention to take out a commission as privateer, and he fitted out his vessel as best he could. Of men he had not many, but when he left the inlet he sailed down to an island on the coast, where Blackbeard, having had too many men on his return from Charlestown, had marooned a large number of the sailors belonging to his different crews, finding this the easiest way of getting rid of them. Bonnet took these men on board with the avowed intention of taking them to St. Thomas, and then he set sail upon the high seas as free and untrammelled as a fish-hawk sweeping over the surface of a harbour with clearance papers tied to his leg. Stede Bonnet had changed very much since he last trod the quarter-deck of the Revenge as her captain. He was not so important to look at, and he put on fewer airs of authority, but he issued a great many more commands. In fact, he had learned much about a sailor's life, of navigation and the management of a vessel, and was far better able to command a ship than he had ever been before. He had had a long rest from the position of a pirate captain, and he had not failed to take advantage of the lessons which had been involuntarily given him by the veteran scoundrels who had held him in contempt. He was now, to a great extent, sailing master as well as captain of the Revenge, but Ben Greenway, who was much given to that sort of thing, undertook to offer Bonnet some advice in regard to his course. "I am no sailor," said he, "but I ken a chart when I see it, and it is my opeenion that there is no need o' your sailing so far to the east before ye turn about southward. There is naething much sticking out from the coast between here and St. Thomas." Bonnet looked at the Scotchman with lofty contempt. "Perhaps you can tell me," said he, "what there is sticking out from the coast between here and Ocracoke Inlet, where you yourself told me that Blackbeard had gone with the one sloop he kept for himself." "Blackbeard!" shouted the Scotchman. "And what in the devil have you got to do with Blackbeard?" "Do with that infernal dog!" cried Bonnet. "I have everything to do with him before I do aught with anybody, or anything besides. He stole from me my possessions, he degraded me from my position, he made me a laughing-stock to my men, and he even made me blush and bow my head with shame before my daughter and my brother-in-law, two people in whose sight I would have stood up grander and bolder than before any others in the world. He took away from me my sword, and he gave me instead a wretched pen. He made me nothing where I had been everything. He even ceased to consider me any more than if I had been the dirty deck under his feet. And then when he had done with my property and could get no more good out of it, he cast it to me in charity as a man would toss a penny to a beggar. Before I sail anywhere else, Ben Greenway," continued Bonnet, "I sail for Ocracoke Inlet, and when I sight Blackbeard's miserable little sloop, I shall pour broadside after broadside into her until I sink his wretched craft with his bedizzled carcass on board of it." "But will your men stand by ye?" cried Greenway. "You're neither a pirate nor a vessel o' war to enter into business like that." Bonnet swore one of his greatest oaths. "There is no business nor war for me, Ben Greenway," he cried, "until I have taught that insolent Blackbeard what manner of man I am." Ben Greenway was very much disheartened. If Blackbeard should sink the Revenge instead of Master Bonnet sinking him, he said to himself, and would be kind enough to maroon my old master and me, it might be the best for everybody after all. Master Bonnet is vera humble-minded and complacent when bad fortune comes upon him, and it is my opinion that on a desert island I could weel manage him for the good o' his soul." But there were no vessels sunk on that cruise. Blackbeard had gone, nobody knew where, and after a time Bonnet gave up the search for his old enemy and turned his bow southward. Now Ben Greenway's countenance gleamed once more. "It'll be a glad day at Spanish Town when Mistress Kate shall get my letter." "And what have you been writing to her?" cried Bonnet. "I told her," said Ben Greenway, how at last ye hae come to your right mind, and how ye are a true servant o' the king, wi' your pardon in your pocket and your commission waitin' for ye at St. Thomas, and that, whatever else ye may do at sea, there'll be no more black flag floatin' over your head, nor a seesaw plank wobblin' under the feet o' anybody else. The days o' your piracies are over, and you're an honest mon once more." "You wrote her that?" said Bonnet with a frown. "Aye," said Greenway, "and I left it in the care o' a good man whose ship is weel on its way to Kingston by this day." That afternoon Captain Bonnet called all his men together and addressed them. He made a very good speech, a better one than delivered when he first took real command of the Revenge after sailing out of the river at Bridgetown, and it was listened to with respectful and earnest interest. In brief manner he explained to all on board that he had thrown to the winds all idea of merchandising or privateering, that his pardon and his ship's clearance were of no value to him except he should happen to get into some uncomfortable predicament with the law, that he had no idea of sailing towards St. Thomas, but intended to proceed up the coast, to burn and steal and rob and slay wherever he might find it convenient to do so, that he had brought the greater part of his crew from the desert island where Blackbeard had left them because he knew that they were stout and reckless fellows, just the sort of men he wanted for the piratical cruise he was about to begin, and that in order to mislead any government authorities who by land or sea might seek to interfere with him, he had changed the name of the good old Revenge to the Royal James, while its captain, once Stede Bonnet, was now to be known on board and everywhere else as Captain Thomas, with nothing against him. He concluded by saying that all that had been done on that ship from the time she first hoisted the black flag until the present moment was nothing at all compared to the fire and the blood and the booty which should follow in the wake of that gallant vessel, the Royal James, commanded by Captain Thomas. The men looked at each other, but did not say much. They were all pirates, although few of them had regularly started out on a piratical career, and there was nothing new to them in this sort of piratical dishonour. In the little cruise after Blackbeard, the captain had shown himself to be a good man, ready with his oaths and very certain about what he wanted done. So, whenever Stede Bonnet chose to run up the Jolly Roger, he might do it for all they cared. Poor Ben Greenway sat apart, his head bowed upon his hands. "You seem to be in a bad case, old Ben," said Bonnet, gazing down upon him. "But you throw yourself into needless trouble. As soon as I lay hold of some craft which I am willing shall go away with a sound hull, I will put you on board of her and let you go back to the farm. I will keep you no longer among these wicked people, Ben Greenway, and in this wicked place." Ben shook his head. "I started wi' ye and I stay wi' ye," said he, "and I'll follow ye to the verra gates o' hell. But farther than that, Master Bonnet, I willna go. At the gates o' hell I leave ye." End of chapter 34. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 35 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 35. A Chapter of Happenings. For happiness with a flaw in it, it was a very fair happiness which now hung over the Delaplaine home near Spanish Town. Kate Bonnet's father was still a pirate, but there was no Captain Vince in hot pursuit of him, seeking his blood. Kate could sing with the birds and laugh with Dickory whenever she thought of the death of the wicked enemy. This was not, it may be thought, a proper joy for a young maiden's heart, but it came to Kate whether she would or not. The change was so great from the fear which had possessed her before. The old home life began again, although it was a very quiet life. Dickory went into Mr. Delaplaine's counting-house, but it was hard for the young man to doff the naval uniform which had been bestowed upon him by Blackbeard, for he knew he looked very well in it, and everybody else thought so and told him so. But it could not be helped, and with all convenient speed he discarded his cocked hat and all the rest of it, and clothed himself in the simple garb of a merchant's clerk. Although it might be said that in all the West Indies at that day there was no clerk so good-looking as was Dickory. Dame Charter was so thankful that her boy had come safely through all his troubles, so proud of him, and so eminently well satisfied with his present position, that she asked nothing of her particular guardian angel but that Stede Bonnet might stay away. If, after tiring of piracy, that man came back, as his relatives wished him to do, the good dame was sure he would make mischief of some sort, and as like as not in the direction of her Dickory. If this evil family genius should be lost at sea or should disappear from the world in some equally painless and undisgraceful fashion, Dame Charter was sure that she could in a reasonable time quiet the grief of poor Kate. For what right-minded damsel could fail to mingle thankfulness with her sorrow that a kind death should relieve a parent from the sins and disgraces which in life always seemed to open up in front of him? About this time there came a letter from Barbados, which was of great interest to everybody in the household. It was from Master Martin Newcombe, and of course was written to Kate, but she read many portions of it to the others. The first part of the epistle was not read aloud, but it was very pleasant for Kate to have read it to herself. This man was a close lover and an ardent one. Whatever had happened to her fortunes, nothing had interfered with his affection. Whatever he had said he still bravely stood by, and to whatever she had objected in the way of obstacles he had paid no attention whatever. In the parts of the letter read to her uncle and the others, Master Newcombe told how, not having heard from them for so long, he had been beginning to be greatly troubled, but the arrival of the Black Swan, which, after touching at Kingston, had continued her course to Barbados, had given him new life and hope, and it was his intention, as soon as he could arrange his affairs, to come to Jamaica, and there say by word of mouth, and do, in his own person, so much for which a letter was totally inadequate. The thought of seeing Kate again made him tremble as he walked through his fields. This was read inadvertently, and Dickory frowned. Dame Charter frowned too. She had never supposed that Master Newcombe would come to Spanish Town. She had always looked upon him as a very worthy young farmer, so worthy that he would not neglect his interest by travelling about to other islands than his own. She did not know exactly how her son felt about this, nor did she like to ask him, but Dickory saved her the trouble. "If that Newcombe comes here," he said, "I'm going to fight him." "What?" cried his mother. "You would not do that. That would be terrible. It would ruin everything." "Ruin what?" he asked. His mother answered diplomatically, "It would ruin all your fine opportunities in this family." Dickory smiled with a certain sarcastic hardness. "I don't mean," said he, "that I am going to hack at him with a sword, because neither he nor I properly know how to use swords, and after the wonderful practice that I have seen, I would not want to prove myself a bungler even if the other man were a worse one. No, mother, I mean to fight with him by all fair means to gain the hand of my dear Kate. I love her, and I am far more worthy of her than he is. He is not a well-disposed man, being rough and inconsiderate in his speech." Dickory had never forgiven the interview by the river bank when he had gone to see Madam Bonnet, And as to his being a stout lover, he is none of it. Had he been that, he would long ago have crossed the little sea between Barbados and here." "Do you mean, you foolish boy," exclaimed Dame Charter, "to say that you presume to love our Mistress Kate?" And her eyes glowed upon him with all the warmth of a mother's pride, for this was the wish of her heart, and never absent from it. "Ay, mother," said Dickory, "I shall fight for her. I shall show her that I am worthier than he is, and that I love her better. I shall even stride for her if that mad pirate comes back and tries to overset everything." "Oh, do it before that," cried Dame Charter, anxiety in every wrinkle. "Do it before that." Mr. Delaplaine was a little troubled by the promised visit from Barbados. He had heard of Master Newcombe as being a most estimable young man, but the fault about him, in his opinion, was that he resided not in Jamaica. For a long time the good merchant had lived his own life, with no one to love him, and he now had with him his sister's child, whom he had come to look upon as a daughter, and he did not wish to give her up. It was true that it might be possible, under favourable pressure, to induce young Newcombe to come to Jamaica and settle there, but this was all very vague. Had he had his own way, he would have driven from Kate every thought of love or marriage until the time when his new clerk, Dickory Charter, had become a young merchant of good standing, worthy of such a wife. Then he might have been willing to give Kate to Dickory, and Dickory would have given her to him, and they might have all been happy. That is, if that harebrained Bonnet did not come home. The Delaplaine family did not go much into society at that time, for people had known about the pirate and his ship, the Revenge, and the pursuit upon which Captain Vince of the royal corvette Badger had been sent. They had all heard, too, of the death of Captain Vince, and some of them were not quite certain whether he had been killed by the pirate Bonnet or another desperado equally dangerous. Knowing all this, although if they had not known it they would scarcely have found it out from the speech of their neighbours, the Delaplaines kept much to themselves. And they were happy, and the keynote of their happiness was struck by Kate, whose thankful heart could never forget the death of Captain Vince. Mr. Delaplaine made his proper visit to Spanish Town, to carry his thanks and to tell the governor how things had happened to him. And the governor still showed his interest in Mistress Kate Bonnet, and expressed his regret that she could not come with her uncle, which was a very natural wish indeed for a governor of good taste. This is a chapter of happenings, and the next happening was a letter from that good man Ben Greenway, and it told the most wonderful, splendid, and glorious news that had ever been told under the bright sun of the beautiful West Indies. It told that Captain Stede Bonnet was no longer a pirate, and that Kate was no longer a pirate's daughter. These happy people did not join hands and dance and sing over the great news, but Kate's joy was so great that she might have done all these things without knowing it. So thankful was she that once again she had a father. This rapture so far outshone her relief at the news of the death of Captain Vince that she almost forgot that that wicked man was safe and dead. Kate was in such a state of wild delight that she insisted that her uncle should make another visit to the governor's house and take her with him, that she herself might carry the governor the good news. And the governor said such heart-warming things when he heard it that Kate kissed him in very joy. But as Dickory was not of the party, this incident was not entered as part of the proceedings. Now society, both in Spanish Town and Kingston, opened its arms and insisted that the fair star of Barbados should enter them, and there were parties and dances and dinners, and it might have been supposed that everybody had been a father or a mother to a prodigal son, so genial and joyful were the festivities, Kate high above all others. At some of these social functions Dickory Charter was present, but it is doubtful whether he was happier when he saw Kate surrounded by gay admirers, or when he was at home imagining what was going on about her. There was but one cloud in the midst of all this sunshine, and that was that Mr. Delaplaine, Dame Charter, and her son Dickory could not forget that it was now in the line of events that Stede Bonnet would soon be with them, and beyond that all was chaos. And over the seas sailed the good ship, the Royal James, Captain Thomas in command. End of chapter 35. Recording by Meg Turecek. Chapter 36 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turecek. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 36. The Tide Decides. It was now September, and the weather was beautiful on the North Carolina coast. Captain Thomas, late Bonnet, of the Royal James, late Revenge, had always enjoyed cool nights and invigorating morning air, and therefore it was that he said to his faithful servitor, Ben Greenway, when first he stepped out upon the deck of his vessel lay comfortably anchored in a little cove in the Cape Fear River, that he did not remember ever having been in a more pleasant harbour. This well-tried pirate captain, Stede Bonnet, as we shall call him, notwithstanding his assumption of another name, was in a genial mood as he drank in the morning air. From his point of view he had a right to be genial. He had a right to be pleased with the scenery and the air. He had a right to swear at the Scotchman, and to ask him why he did not put on a merrier visage on such a sparkling morning. For since he had first started out as Captain Thomas of the Royal James, he had been a most successful pirate. He had sailed up the Virginia coast. He had burned, he had sunk, he had robbed, he had slain. He had gone up the Delaware Bay, and the people in the ships and the people on the coasts trembled even when they heard that his black flag had been sighted. No man could now say that the former captain of the Revenge was not an accomplished and seasoned desperado. Even the great Blackbeard would not have cared to give him nicknames, nor dared to play his blithesome tricks upon him. He was now no more Captain Nightcap to any man. His crew of hairy ruffians had learned to understand that he knew what he wanted, and, more than that, he knew how to order it done. They listened to his great oaths, and they respected him. This powerful pirate now commanded a small fleet, for in the cove where he lay his flagship also lay 2 good-sized sloops, manned by their own crews, which he had captured in Delaware Bay and had brought down with him to this quiet spot, a few miles up the Cape Fear River, where he now was repairing his own ship, which had had a hard time of it since she had again come into his hands. For many a long day the sound of the hammer and the saw had mingled with the song of the birds, and Captain Bonnet felt that in a day or 2 he might again sail upon the sea, conveying his 2 prizes to some convenient mart, while he could, with his good ship, freshened and restored, would go in search of more victories, more booty, and more blood. "Greenway, I tell you," said Bonnet, continuing his remarks, "you are too glum. You've got the only long face in all this, my fleet. Even those poor fellows who man my prizes are not so solemn, although they know not, when I have done with them, whether I shall maroon them to quietly starve or shall sink them in their own vessels." "But I hae no such reason to be cheerful," said Ben. "I hae bound mysel' down by ye till ye hae gone to the devil. and I had no chance of freeing myself from my responsibilities by perishing on land or in the sea. If anything could make me glum, Ben Greenway, it would be you," said the other. "But I am getting used to you, and some of these days when I have captured a ship laden with Scotch liquors and Scotch plaids, I believe that you will turn pirate yourself for the sake of your share of the prizes." "Which is likely to be on the same morning that you turn to be an honest mon," said Ben, "but I am not in the way of expecting miracles." On went the pounding and sawing, and the hammering and the swearing, and the singing of birds, although the latter were a little farther away than they had been, and in the course of the day the pirate captain, erect, scrutinizing, and blasphemous, went over his ship, superintending the repairs. In a day or two everything would be finished, and then he and his 2 prizes could up sail and away. It was a beautiful harbour in which he lay, but he was getting tired of it. There were great prospects before our pirate captain. Perhaps he might have the great good fortune to fall in with that low-born devil, Blackbeard, who, when last he had been heard from, commanded a small vessel, fearing no attack upon this coast. What a proud and glorious moment it would be when a broadside and another should be poured in upon his little craft from the long guns of the Royal James. Bonnet was still standing, reflecting, with bright eyes, upon his dazzling future, and wondering what would be the best way of letting the dastardly Blackbeard know whose guns they were which had sunk his ship, when a boat was seen coming around the headland. This was one of his own boats, which had been posted as a sentinel, and which now brought the news that 2 vessels were coming in at the mouth of the river, but that as the distance was great, and the night was coming on, they could not decide what manner of craft that they were. This information made everybody jump on board the Royal James, and the noise of the sawing and the hammering ceased as completely as had the songs of the birds. In a few minutes that quick and able mariner, Bonnet, had sent 3 armed boats down the river to reconnoitre. If the vessels entering the river were merchantmen, they should not be allowed to get away. But if they were enemies, although it was difficult to understand how enemies could make their appearance in these quiet waters, they must be attended to, either by fight or flight. When the 3 boats came back, and it was late before they appeared, every man upon the Royal James was crowded along her side to hear the news, and even the people on the prizes knew that something had happened, and stood upon every point of vantage, hoping that in some way they could find out what it was. The news brought by the boats was to the effect that 2 vessels, not sailing as merchantmen and well armed and manned, were now ashore on sandy bars, not very far above the mouth of the river. Now Bonnet swore bravely. If the work upon his vessels had been finished, he would up anchor and away and sail past these 2 grounded ships, whatever they were and whatever they came for. He would sail past them and take with him his 2 prizes. He would glide out to sea with the tide, and he would laugh at them as he left them behind. But the Royal James was not ready to sail. The night was now low. 5 hours afterward, when it should be high, those 2 ships, whatever they were, would float again, and the Royal James, whatever her course of action should be, would be cut off from the mouth of the river. This was a greater risk than even a pirate as bold as Bonnet would wish to run, and so there was no sleep that night on the Royal James. The blows of the hammers and the sounds of the saws made a greater noise than they had ever done before, so that the night birds were frightened and flew shrieking away. every man worked with all the energy that was in him, for each hairy rascal had reason to believe that if the vessel they were on did not get out of the river before the two armed strangers should be afloat, there might be hard times ahead for them. Even Ben Greenway was aroused. "The devil shall not get him any sooner than can be helped," he said to himself, and he hammered and sawed with the rest of them. On his stout and well-armed sloop the Henry, Mr. William Rhett, of Charlestown, South Carolina, paced anxiously all night. Frequently from the sandbar on which his vessel was grounded, he called over to the other sloop, also fast grounded, giving orders and asking questions. On both vessels everybody was at work, getting ready for action when the tide should rise. Some weeks before the wails and complaints of a tortured sea-coast had come down from the Jersey shores to South Carolina, asking for help at the only place along the coast whence help could come, a pirate named Thomas was working his way southward, spreading terror before him and leaving misery behind. These appeals touched the hearts of the people of Charlestown, already sore from the injuries and insults inflicted upon them by Blackbeard in those days when Bonnet sat silently on the pirate ship, doing nothing and learning much. There was no hesitancy. For their own sake and for the sake of their commerce, this new pirate must not come to Charlestown harbor, and an expedition of 2 vessels, heavily armed and well manned and commanded by Mr. William Rhett, was sent northward up the coast to look for the pirate named Thomas, and to destroy him and his ship. Mr. Rhett was not a military man, nor did he belong to the navy. He was a citizen capable of commanding soldiers, and as such he went forth to destroy the pirate Thomas. Mr. Rhett met people along the coast who told him where he might find the pirate, but he found no one to tell him how to navigate the dangerous waters of the Cape Fear River, and so it was that soon after entering that fine stream he and his consort found themselves aground. Mr. Rhett was quite sure that he had discovered the lair of the big game he was looking for. Just before dark, 3 boats, well filled with men, had appeared from up the river, and they had looked so formidable that everything had been made ready to resist an attack from them. They retired, but every now and then during the night, when there was quiet for a few minutes, there would come down the river on the wind the sound of distant hammering and the noise of saws. It was after midnight before Henry and the sea nymph floated free, but they anchored where they were and waited for the morning. Whether they would sail up the river after the pirate, or whether he would come down to them, daylight would show. Mr. Rhett's vessels had been at anchor for 5 hours, and every man on board of them were watching and waiting, when daylight appeared and showed them a tall ship, under full sail, rounding the distant headland up the river. Now up came their anchors and their sails were set. The pirate was coming. Whatever the Royal James intended to do, Mr. Rhett had but one plan, and that was to meet the enemy as soon as possible and fight him. So up sailed the Henry and up sailed the Sea Nymph, and they pressed ahead so steadily to meet the Royal James that the latter vessel, in carrying out what was now her obvious intention of getting out to sea, was forced shoreward, where she speedily ran upon a bar. Then, from the vessels of Charlestown, there came great shouts of triumph, which ceased when first the Henry and then the Sea Nymph ran upon other bars and remained stationary. Here was an unusual condition. 3 ships of war all aground and about to begin a battle which would probably last for 5 hours if one or more of the stationary vessels were not destroyed before that time. It was soon found, however, that there would only be two parties to the fight, for the sea nymph was too far away to use her guns. The Royal James had an advantage over her opponents, since, when she slightly careened, her decks were slanted away from the enemy, while the ladders were presented to her fire. At it they went, hot and heavy. Bonnet and his men now knew that they were engaged with commissioned war vessels, and they fought for their lives. Mr. Rhett knew that he was fighting Thomas, the dreaded pirate of the coast, and he felt that he must destroy him before his vessel should float again. The cannon roared, the muskets blazed away, and the combatants were near enough even to use pistols upon each other. Men died, blood flowed, and the fight grew fiercer and fiercer. Bonnet roared like an incarnate devil. He swore at his men, he swore at the enemy, he swore at his bad fortune, for had he not missed the channel, the game would have been in his own hands. So on they fought, and the tide kept steadily rising. The 5 hours must pass at last, and the vessel which first floated would win the day. The 5 hours did pass, and the Henry floated, and Bonnet swore louder and more fiercely than before. He roared to his men to fire and to fight, no matter whether they were still aground or not, and with many oaths he vowed that if any one of them showed but a sign of weakening, he would cut him down upon the spot. But the hairy scoundrels who made up the crew of the Royal James had no idea of lying there with their ship on its side, while two other ships, for the sea nymph was now afloat, should sail around them, rake their decks, and shatter them to pieces. So the crew consulted together, despite their captain's roars and oaths, and many of them counselled surrender. Their vessel was much farther inshore than the two others, and no matter what happened afterward, they preferred to live longer than 15 or 20 minutes. But Bonnet quailed not before fate, before the enemy, or before his crew. If he heard another word of surrender, he would fire the magazine and blow the ship to the sky with every man in it. Raising his cutlass in air, he was about to bring it down upon one of the cowards he berated, when suddenly he was seized by two powerful hands, which pinned his arms behind him. With a scream of rage, he turned his head and found that he was in the grasp of Ben Greenway. "Let go your sword, Master Bonnet," said Ben. "It is of no use to ye now, for ye canna get away from me. I'm nae older than ye are, though I look it, and I've got the harder muscles. Ye may be making your way steadily and surely to the gates o' hell, and it mayna be possible that I can prevent ye, but I'm not goin' to let ye tumble in by accident so long as I've got two arms left to me." Pale, haggard, and writhing, Stede Bonnet was disarmed, and the Jolly Roger came down. End of chapter 36. Recording by Meg Turecek.
Chapter 37 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 37. Bonnet and Greenway part company. It was 3 days after this memorable combat, for the vessels engaged in it needed considerable repairs, when Mr. Rhett of Charlestown sailed down the Cape Fear River with his 5 vessels, the 2 with which he had entered it, the pirate Royal James, and the 2 prizes of the latter, which had waited quietly up the river to see how matters were going to turn out. On the Henry sailed the pirate Thomas, now discovered to be the notorious Stede Bonnet, and a very quiet and respectful man he was. As has been seen before, Bonnet was a man able to adapt himself to circumstances. There never was a more demure counting-house clerk than was Bonnet at Belize. There never was a humbler dependent than the almost unnoticed Bonnet after he had joined Blackbeard's fleet before Charlestown, and there was never a more deferential and respectful prisoner than Stede Bonnet on board the Henry. But it was really touching to see how this cursing and raging pirate deported himself as a meek and uncomplaining gentleman. There was no prison-house in Charlestown, but Stede Bonnet's wicked crew, including Ben Greenway, for his captors were not making any distinctions in regard to common men taken on a pirate ship, were clapped into the watch-house, and a crowded and uncomfortable place it was, and put under a heavy and military guard. The authorities were, however, making distinctions where gentlemen of family and owners of landed estates were concerned, no matter if they did happen to be taken on a pirate ship, and Major Bonnet of Barbados was lodged in the provost-marshal's house, in comfortable quarters, with only 2 sentinels outside to make him understand he was a prisoner. The capture of this celebrated pirate created a sensation in Charlestown, and many of the citizens were not slow to pay the unfortunate prisoner the attentions due to his former position in society. He was very well satisfied with his treatment in Charlestown, which city he had never before had the pleasure of visiting. The attentions paid to Ben Greenway were not pleasing. Sometimes he was shoved into one corner, and sometimes into another. He frequently had enough to eat and drink, but very often this was not the case. Bonnet never inquired after him. If he thought of him at all, he hoped that he had been killed in the fight, for if that were the case, he would be rid of his eternal preachments. Greenway made known the state of his own case whenever he had a chance to do so, but his complaints received no attention, and he might have remained with the crew of the Royal James as long as they were shut up in the watch-house, had not some of the hairy cut-throats themselves taken pity upon him, and assured the guards that this man was not one of them, and that they knew from what they had heard him say and seen him do that there was no more determined enemy of piracy in all the western continent. So it happened that after some weeks of confinement, Greenway was let out of the watch-house and allowed to find quarters for himself. The first day the Scotchman was free, he went to the provost-marshal's house and petitioned an interview with his old master, Bonnet. "Hey-ho!" cried the latter, who was comfortably seated in a chair reading a letter. "And where do you come from, Ben Greenway? I had thought you were dead and buried in the Cape Fear River." "You did not think I was dead," replied Ben, "when I seized ye and held ye and kept ye from burying yourself in that same river." Bonnet waved his hand. "No more of that," said he. "I was unfortunate, but that is over now, and things have turned out better than any man could have expected." "Better!" exclaimed Ben. "I vow I know not what that means." Bonnet laughed. He was looking very well. He was shaved, and wore a neat suit of clothes. "Ben Greenway," said he, "you are now looking upon a man of high distinction. At this moment I am the greatest pirate on the face of the earth. Yes, Greenway, the greatest pirate on the face of the earth. I have a letter here which was received by the provost-marshal, and which he gave me to read, which tells that Blackbeard, the first pirate of his age, is dead. Therefore, Ben Greenway, I take his place, and there is no living pirate greater than I am." "And ye pride yourself on that at this moment?" asked Ben, truly amazed. "That I do," said Bonnet. "And think of it, Ben Greenway, that presumptuous overbearing Blackbeard was killed, and his head brought away, sticking up on the bow of a vessel. What a rare sight that must have been, Ben. Think of his long beard all tied up with ribbons, stuck up on the bow of a ship." "And ye are now the head deal on earth?" said Ben. "You can put it that way if you like," said Bonnet, "but I am not so looked upon in this town. I am an honoured person. I doubt very much if any prisoner in this country was ever treated with the distinction that is shown me, but I don't wonder at it. I have the reputation of 2 great pirates joined in one. the pirate Bonnet of the dreaded ship Revenge, and the terrible Thomas of the Royal James. My man, there are people in this town who have been to me, and who have said that a man so famous should not even be imprisoned. I have good reason to believe that it will not be long before pardon papers are made out for me, and that I may go my way." "And your men?" asked Greenway. "Will they go free, or will they be hung like common pirates?" Bonnet frowned impatiently. "I don't want to hear anything about the men," he said. "Of course they will be hung. What could be done with them if they were not hung? But it is entirely different with me. I am a most respectable person, and, now that I am willing to resign my piratical career, having won in it all the glory that can come to one man, that respectability must be considered." "Well, well," said the Scotchman, "and when it comes to that, respectability is better for a man's soul and body than righteousness. Then I am no fit counsellor for ye, Master Bonnet." And he took his leave. The next morning, when Ben Greenway left his lodging, he found the town in an uproar. The pirate Bonnet had bribed his sentinels, and with some others had escaped. Ben stood still and stamped his foot. Such infamy, such perfidy to the authorities who had treated him so well, the Scotchman could not at first imagine. But when the truth became plain to him, his face glowed, his eye burned. This vile conduct of his old master was a triumph to Ben's principles. Wickedness was wickedness, and could not be washed away by respectability. The days passed on. Bonnet was recaptured, more securely imprisoned, put upon trial, found guilty, and in spite of the efforts of the advocates of respectability, was condemned to be hung on the same spot where nearly all the members of his pirate crew had been executed. During all this time Ben Greenway kept away from his old master. He had borne ill treatment of every kind, but the deception practised upon him when, at his latest interview, Bonnet talked to him of his respectability, having already planned an escape and return to his evil ways, was too much for the honest Scotchman. He had done with this man, faithless to friend and foe, to his own blood, and even his own bad reputation. But not quite done. It was but half an hour before the time fixed for the pirate's execution that Ben Greenway gained access to him. "What!" cried Bonnet, raising his head from his hands. "You here? I thought I had done with you." "Ay, I'm here," said Ben Greenway. "I had stood by you in good fortune and in bad fortune, and I had never left you, no matter what happened. And I told you I would follow you to the gates of hell, but I could go no farther. I kept my word, and here I stop. Farewell." "The only comfortable thing about this business," said Bonnet, "is to know that at last I am rid of that fellow." End of chapter 37.
Chapter 38 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen Moore. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Again Dickory was there. There were indeed gay times in Spanish Town, and with the 2 loads lifted from her heart, Kate helped very much to promote the gaiety. If this young lady had wished to make a good colonial match, she had opportunities enough for so doing, but she was not in that frame of mind, and encouraged no suitor. But, bright as she was not so bright as on that great and glorious day when she received Ben Greenway's letter, telling her that her father was no longer a pirate. There were several reasons for this gradually growing twilight of her happiness, and one was that no letter came from her father. To be sure, there were many reasons why no letter should come. There were no regular mails in these colonies which could be depended upon, and, besides, the new career of her father, sailing as a privateer under the king's flag, would probably make it very difficult for him to send a letter to Jamaica by any regular or irregular method. Moreover, her father was a miserable correspondent, and always had been. Thus she comforted herself, and was content, though not very well content, to wait. Then there was another thing which troubled her when she thought of it. That good man and steady lover, Martin Newcombe, had written that he was coming to Spanish Town, and she knew very well what he was coming for, and what he would say, but she did not know what she would say to him, and the thought of this troubled her. In a letter she might put off the answer for which she had been so long and patiently waiting, but when she met him face to face, there could be no more delay. She must tell him yes or no, and she was not ready to do this. There was so much to think of, so many plans to be considered in regard to going back to Barbados or staying in Jamaica, that really she could not make up her mind. At least not until she had seen her father. She would be so sorry if Mr. Newcombe came to Spanish Town before her father should arrive, or at least before she should hear from him. Then there was another thing which added to the twilight of these cheerful days, and this Kate could scarcely understand, because she could see no reason why he should affect her. The governor, whom they frequently met in the course of the pleasant social functions of the town, looked troubled, and was not the genial gentleman he used to be. Of course he had a right to his own private perplexities and annoyances, but it grieved Kate to see the change in him. He had always been so cordial and so cheerful. He was now just as kind as ever, perhaps a little more so, in his manner, but he was not cheerful. Kate mentioned to her uncle the changed demeanor of the governor, but he could give no explanation. He had heard of no political troubles, but supposed that family matters might easily have saddened the good man. He himself was not very cheerful, for day after day brought nearer the time when that uncertain Stede Bonnet might arrive in Jamaica, and what would happen after that no man could tell. One thing he greatly feared, and that was, that his dear niece, Kate, might be taken away from him. Dame Charter was not so very cheerful either. Only in one way did she believe in Stede Bonnet, and that was, that after some fashion or another he would come between her and her bright dreams for her dear Dickory. And so there were some people in Spanish Town who were not as happy as they had been. Still there were dinners and little parties, and society made itself very pleasant, and in the midst of them all a ship came in from Barbados, bringing a letter from Martin Newcombe. A strange thing about this letter was that it was addressed to Mr. Delaplaine and not to Miss Kate Bonnet. This, of course, proved the letter must be on business, and although he was with his little family when he opened his letter, he thought it well to glance at it before reading it aloud. The first few lines showed him that it was indeed a business letter, for it told of the death of Madame Bonnet, and how the writer, Martin Newcombe, as a neighbor and friend of the family, had been called in to take temporary charge of her effects, and, having done so, he hastened to inform Mr. Delaplaine of his proceedings and to ask advice. This letter he now read aloud, and Kate and the others were greatly interested therein, although they cautiously forbore the expression of any opinion which might rise in their minds regarding this turn of affairs. Having finished these business details, Mr. Delaplaine went on and read aloud, and in the succeeding portion of the letter Mr. Newcombe begged Mr. Delaplaine to believe that it was the hardest duty of his whole life to write what he was now obliged to write, but that he knew he must do it, and therefore would not hesitate. At this the reader looked at his niece and stopped. "Go on," cried Kate, her face a little flushed. "Go on." The face of Mr. Delaplaine was pale, and for a moment he hesitated. Then, with a sudden jerk, he nerved himself to the effort and read on. He had seen enough to make him understand that the duty before him was to read on. End of chapter 38. Chapter 39 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen Moore. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. The blessings which come from the death of the wicked. It was 3 weeks after Martin Newcombe's letter came before Ben Greenway arrived in Spanish Town. He had had a hard time to get there, having but little money and no friends to help him. But he had a strong heart and an earnest, and so he was bound to get there at last. And although Kate saw no visitors, she saw him. She was not dressed in mourning. She could not wear black for herself. She greeted the Scotchman with earnestness. He was a friend out of the old past, but she gave him no chance to speak first. "Ben," she exclaimed, "have you a message for me?" "No message," he replied, "but I hae somethin' on my heart I wish to say to ye. I hae toiled on laboured and hae striven, why mony obstacles to get to ye and to say it. She looked at him with her brows knit, wondering if she should allow him to speak. Then, with the words scarcely audible between her tightly closed lips, she said, "Ben, what is it?" "It is this, and no more nor less," replied the Scotchman. "He was never fit to be your father, and it is not fit now for ye to remember him as your father. I was faithful to him to the very last, but there was no truth in him. It is an abomination and a wickedness for ye to remember him as your father." Kate spoke no words, nor did she shed a tear. "It was my heart's desire ye should know it," said the Scotchman, "and I came mony a weary league to tell ye so." "Ben," said she, "I think I have known it for a long time, but I would not suffer myself to believe it. But now, having heard your words, I am sure of it." "Uncle," said she an hour afterward, "I have no father, and I never had one." With tears in his eyes he folded her to his breast, and peace began to rise in his soul. No greater blessing can come to really good people than the absolute disappearance of the wicked. And the wickedness which had so long shadowed and stained the life of Kate Bonnet was now removed from it. It was hard to get away from the shadow and to wipe off the stain, but she was a brave girl, and she did it. In this work of her life, a work that if not accomplished would make that life not worth the living, Kate was much helped by Dickory. And he helped her by not saying a word about it or ever allowing himself, when in her presence, to remember that there had been a shadow or a stain. And if he thought of it at all when by himself, his only feeling was one of thankfulness that what had happened had given her to him. Even the governor brightened. He had striven hard to keep from Kate the news which had come to him from Charles Town, suppressing it in the hopes that it might reach her more gradually and with less terrible effect than if he told it. But now that he knew that she knew it, the blessings which are shed abroad by the disappearance of the wicked affected him also, and he brightened. There were no functions for Kate, but she brightened, striving with all her soul to have this so, for her own sake as well as that of others. As for Mr. Delaplaine, Dame Charter, and Dickory, they brightened without any trouble at all, the disappearance of the wicked having such a direct and forcible effect upon them. Dickory Charter, who matured in a fashion which made everybody forget that Kate Bonnet was 11 months his senior, entered into business with Mr. Delaplaine, and Jamaica became the home of this happy family, whose welfare was founded, as on a rock, upon the disappearance of the wicked. Here, then, was a brave girl who had loved her father with a love which was more than that of a daughter, which was the love of a mother, of a wife, who had loved him in prosperity and in times of sorrow and of shame, who had rejoiced like an angel whenever he turned his footsteps into the right way, and who had mourned like an angel whenever he went wrong. She had longed to throw her arms around her father's neck, to hold him to her, and thus keep off the hangman's noose. Her courage and affection never waned until those arms were rudely thrust aside, and their devoted owner dastardly repulsed. True to herself and to him, she loved her father so long as there was anything parental in him which she might love, and, true to herself, when he had left her nothing she might love, she bowed her head and suffered him, as he passed out of his life, to pass out of her own. End of chapter 39.
Chapter 40 of Kate Bonnet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton. Chapter 40. In the river at Bridgetown lay the good brig King and Queen, just arrived from Jamaica. On her deck was an impatient young gentleman, leaning over the rail and watching the approach of a boat, with 2 men rowing and a passenger in the stern. This impatient young man was Dickory Carter, that morning arrived at Bridgetown and not yet having been on shore. He came for the purpose of settling some business affairs, partly on account of Miss Kate Bonnet, and partly for his mother. As the boat came nearer, Dickory recognized one of the men who were rowing, and hailed him.
"Hey-ho, Tom Hillier," he cried. "I am right glad to see you on this river again. I want a boat to go to my mother's house. Know you of one at liberty?" The man ceased rowing for a moment, and then addressed the passenger in the stern, who, having heard what he had to say, nodded briefly. "Well, well, Dick Charter," cried out the man, "and have you come back as governor of the colony? You look fine enough anyway, but if you want a boat to go to your mother's old home, you can have a seat in this one. We're going there, and our passenger does not object." "Pull up here," cried Dickory, and in a moment he had dropped into the bow of the boat, which then proceeded on its way. The man in the stern was fairly young, handsome, sunburned, and well dressed in a suit of black. When Dickory thanked him for allowing him to share his boat, the passenger in the stern nodded his head with a jerk and an air which indicated that he took the incident as a matter of course, not to be further mentioned or considered. The men who rowed the boat were good oarsmen, but they were not thoroughly acquainted with the cove, especially at low tide, and presently they ran upon a sandbar. Then uprose the passenger in the stern and began to swear with an ease and facility which betokened long practice. Dickory did not swear, but he knit his brows and berated himself for not having taken the direction of the course into his own hands, he who knew the river and the cove so well. The tide was rising, but Dickory was too impatient to sit still and wait until it should be high enough to float the boat. That was his old home, that little house at the head of the cove, and he wanted to get there. He wanted to see it. Part of the business which brought him to Barbados concerned that little house. With a sudden movement he made a dive at his shoes and stockings, and speedily had them lying at the bottom of the boat. Then he stepped overboard and waded towards the shore. In some of the deeper places he wetted the bottom of his breeches, but he did not mind that. The passenger in the stern sat down, but he continued to swear. Presently Dickory was on the dry sand and running up to that cottage door. A little back from the front of the house, and in the shade, there was a bench, and on this bench there sat a girl, reading. She lifted her head in surprise as Dickory approached, for his bare feet had made no noise. Then she stood up quickly, blushing. "You!" she exclaimed. "Yes," cried Dickory, "and you look just the same as when you first put your head above the bushes and talked to me." "Except that I am more suitably clothed," she said. And she was entirely right, for her present dress was feminine and extremely becoming. Dickory did not wish to say anything more on this subject, and so he remarked, "I have just arrived at the town, and I came directly here." Lucilla blushed again. "This is my old home," added Dickory. "But you knew we were here?" she asked, with a hesitating look of inquiry. "Oh, yes," said he, "I knew that the house had been let to your father." Now she changed colour twice, first red, then white. "Are you," she said, "I mean, the other, is she—" "I left her in Jamaica," said Dickory, "but I am going to marry her." For the moment the rim of her hat got between the sun and her face, and one could not decide very well whether her countenance was red or white. "I am very glad to find you here," said Dickory, "and may I see your father and mother?" "Yes," said she, "but they are both in the field with my young sister. But who is this man walking up the shore? And is that the boat you came in?" "It is," said Dickory. "We stuck fast, but I was in such a hurry that I waded ashore. I don't know the man. He had hired the boat and kindly took me in. I was in such haste to get here." For a moment Lucilla bent her eyes on the ground. "In such a haste to get here?" she said to herself. Then she raised her head and exclaimed, "Oh, I know that man. He is the pirate captain who captured the Belinda, which afterward brought us here." And with both hands outstretched she ran to meet him. The face of Captain Ichabod glowed with irrepressible delight. One might have thought he was about to embrace the young woman, notwithstanding the presence of Dickory and the two boatmen, but he did everything he could do before witnesses to express his joy. Dickory now stepped up to Captain Ichabod. "Oh, now I know you," cried he, and he held out his hand. "You were very kind indeed to my friends, and they have spoken much about you. This is my old home. This is the house where I was born." "Yes, yes, indeed," said Captain Ichabod. "A very good house, bedad, a very good house." But hesitating a little, and addressing Lucilla, "You don't live here alone, do you?" The girl laughed. "Oh, no," she cried. "My father and mother will be here presently. In fact, I see them coming." "That's very well," said Ichabod. "Very well indeed. It's quite right that they should live with you. I remember them now. They were on the ship with you." "Oh, yes," said Lucilla, still laughing. Quite right," said Ichabod. "That was very right." "I will go greet your father and mother and the dear little Lena. I remember them so well," said Dickory. He started to run off in spite of his bare feet, but he had gone but a little way when Lucilla stopped him. She looked up at him, and this time her face was white. "Are you sure," said she, "that everything is settled between you and that other girl?" "Very sure," said Dickory, looking kindly upon her, and remembering how pretty she had looked when he first saw her face over the bushes. She did not say anything, but turned and walked back to Captain Ichabod. She found that tall gentleman somewhat agitated. He seemed to have a great deal on his mind which he wished to say, feeling at the same time that he ought to say everything first. "That's your father and mother," said he, "stopping to talk to the young man who was born here?" "Yes," she answered, "and they will be with us presently." Very good, that's quite right," said Captain Ichabod hurriedly. "But before they come I want to say, that is, I would like you to know that I have sold my ship. I am not a pirate any longer. I am a sugar planter, bedad. Beg your pardon. That is, I intend to be one. You remember that you once talked to me about sugar planting in Barbados, and so I am here. I want to find a good sugar plantation, to buy it, and live on it. I heard that you were stopping on this side of the river, and so I came here." "But there is no sugar plantation here," said Lucilla, very demurely. "Oh, no," said Ichabod. "Oh, no, of course not. But you are here, and I wanted to find you. A sugar plantation would be of no use without you." She looked at him, still very demurely. "I don't quite understand you," she said. She turned her head a little and saw that her family and Dickory were slowly moving towards the house. She knew that with diffident persons no time should be lost, for, if interrupted, it often happened that they did not begin again. "Then I suppose," she said, her face turned up towards him, but her eyes cast down, "that you are going to say that you would like to marry me." Of course," exclaimed Ichabod. "I thought you knew that that is what I came here for, bedad." "Very well, then," said Lucilla, turning her eyes to the face of the man she had dreamed of in many happy nights. "No, no," she added quickly, "you must not kiss me. They are all coming, and there are the 2 boatmen." He did not kiss her, but later he made up for the omission. The moment Mrs. Mander saw Captain Ichabod and her daughter standing together, she knew exactly what had happened. She had noticed things on board the Belinda. She hurried up to Lucilla and drew her aside. "My dear," she whispered with a frightened face, "you cannot marry a pirate. You never, never can." "Dear mother," said Lucilla, "he is not a pirate. He has sold his ship and is going to be a sugar planter." Now they all came up and heard these words of Lucilla. "Yes, indeed," said Captain Ichabod. "You may not suppose it, but your daughter and I are about to marry, and will plant sugar together. Now I want to buy a plantation. Where is that young man who was born here, bedad?" Dickory advanced, laughing. Here was a fine opportunity, a miraculous opportunity, of disposing of the Bonnet estate, which was part of the business which had brought him here. So he told the beaming captain that he knew of a fine plantation up the river, which he thought would suit him. "Very good," said Captain Ichabod. "I have a boat here. Let us go and look at the place, and if it suits us I will buy it, bedad." So with Mrs. Mander and her husband beside her, and with Lucilla and the captain by her, the boat was rowed up the river, with Dickory and young Lena in the bow. When the boat reached the Bonnet estate, it was run up on the shore near the shady spot where Kate Bonnet had once caught a fish. Then they all stepped out upon the little beach. Even the oarsmen made the boat fast and joined the party, who started to walk up to the house. Suddenly Captain Ichabod stopped and said to Mr. Mander, "I don't think I care to walk up that hill, you know, and if you and your good wife will look over that house and cast your eyes about the place, I will buy it, if you say so. You know a good deal more about such things than I do, bedad." "I suppose, of course, that will suit you," he said to Lucilla. It suited Lucilla exactly. They sat in the shade in the very place where Kate had sat when she saw Master Newcombe crossing the bridge. A small boat came down the river, rowed by a young man. As he passed the old Bonnet property, he carelessly cast his eyes shoreward, but his heart took no interest in what he saw there. What did it matter to him if two lovers sat there in the shade, close to the river's brink? His sad soul now took no interest in lovers. He had just been up the river to arrange for the sale of his plantation to one of his neighbours. He had decided to leave the island of Barbados and return to England. The house suited Captain Ichabod exactly when Mrs. Mander told him about it, and Lucilla agreed with him because she was always accustomed to trust her mother in such things. So they all got into the boat and rowed back to Dickory's old home, and on the way Captain Ichabod told Dickory that when they returned together to the town he would pay him for the plantation, having brought specie sufficient for the purpose. It was a gay party in the boat as they rowed down the river. It was a gay party at the house when they reached it, and they would have all taken supper together had the Manders been prepared for such hospitality. But they were poor, having taken the place upon a short lease, and having had but few returns so far. But they were all going to live at the old Bonnet place, and happiness shone over everything. It was twilight, and the two young men were about to walk down to the boat, one of them promising to come again early in the morning, when Lucilla approached Dickory. "Where are you going to live with that girl?" she asked in a low voice. "In Jamaica," said he. "I am glad of it," she replied, quite frankly. They were well content, those Jamaica people, when Ben Greenway came to live with them. It had been proposed at one time that he should go to his old Bridgetown home and take charge of the place as he used to, but the good Scotchman demurred to this. "I ha' served ane master before he became a pirate," he said, "and I don't want to try another after he has finished being un. If I serve any mon, let him be one wha has been righteous, wha is righteous now, and will continue in righteousness." "Then serve Mr. Delaplaine," said Dickory. The Manders soon removed to the little house where Dickory was born. The mansion of their daughter and her husband was a hospitable place and a lively, but the life there was so wayward, erratic, and eccentric that it did not suit their sober lives and the education of their young daughter. So they dwelt contentedly in the cottage at the head of the cove, and there was much rowing up and down the river. It was upon a fine morning that the ex-pirate Ichabod thus addressed a citizen of the town. "Yes, sir, I know well who once lived in the house I own. I knew the man myself. I knew him at Belize. He was a dastardly knave, and would have played false to the sun, the moon, and the stars, had they shown him an opportunity, bedad. But I also knew his daughter. She sailed on my ship for many days, and her presence blessed the very boards she trod on. She is a most noble lady, and if you will not admit, sir, that her sweet spirit and pure soul have not banished from this earth every taint of wickedness left here by her father, then, sir, bedad, stand where you are and draw." The end. End of chapter 40. End of Kate Bonnet by Frank R. Stockton.